Hey guys, I'm going to give this a minute to confirm we have sound, and then we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to give this a minute to, okay, we have sound. All right, well, welcome to another Murderous Heart Live. This live is obviously going to be about Colby. A few introductory words, and then we'll jump in. For this live, I'm just confirming that it's recording. Yes, it is. Okay, great. I have like backups to my backups now. So I'm going to say a few introductory words, and I'll actually be kind of bouncing back and forth between like going on camera, showing a presentation. This live will be by far the toughest live I've had to do. I'm going to be referencing the FOIA docs around Joe and Lori's divorce, which also kind of coincides with the FOIA docs around Charles and Cheryl's divorce. And then also I will be referencing some notes that someone passed on to me 2.5 years ago. This was someone who was involved in the investigation at that time. This person reached out to me just to let me know, hey, those of us who were involved in the investigation did not believe the allegations that Colby made against your brother, and we still don't. And anyway, so I have, and I don't mean this as a flex, I have exercised restraint. I mean, like I said, I've had these notes for 2.5 years. I will still be erring on the side of caution. Like initially, when I pulled together this presentation, I had just a few, maybe a handful of screenshots from those notes, and then decided, okay, well, these notes aren't publicly available. So what I did was I took the screenshots that I was going to include and sent them to just like the first few mods who said, yes, I will be there. Tonight, I'm probably more cautious than I need to be, but I just want to make sure that these don't get out. I want to be above all else fair. I want to be fair to Colby. Part of my hesitation, extreme hesitation for all this time in doing this live, is that I have known that these documents do shed a lot of light on why charges weren't pursued. And in fact, even in investigating these charges and diving into the FOIA docs, I made new discoveries this week. Like I found out that this actually went before a grand jury. I didn't know that before, and it was no build. In other words, the grand jury said there isn't enough evidence and there were issues. And but anyway, so some of the details in these documents shed light on why it was no build. Another hesitation early on was like people were pressuring me to say that I didn't believe Colby. And it wasn't an issue. Like, do you believe your brother or do you believe Colby? Anyone who has followed my lives, my dashboard, my, just the way I process and present data, I rely very, very heavily on facts. And so without having facts, I just didn't, it's not in my personality to say, I don't believe this person, I believe this person. And also as a victim of SA, I'm sure there are people who would have said, there's no way, if I had disclosed who the people were, and there were multiple people, there would be people who would say, there's no way that person did that, like, oh, they were pillars in the community, or, whatever. So on that side, there are just a lot of things pulling at me. The reason I decided to do the live, I mentioned this in the description, I just feel at this point, after Lori made her bizarre allocution at her sentencing hearing, even that I would have been willing to dismiss, just because if there wasn't enough rope around her neck before she opened her mouth, she just like wrapped it that much tighter and ensured the fate that befell her, which was 5 life sentences. But the fact that Summer echoed them, it's not retaliatory. It is not. I mean, one of the functions of how I grew up is I had a very cruel foster mother who interrogated me on a very, very regular basis. She was very cruel in these interrogations. Why am I sharing this? Well, this was the gift that kept on giving, because she didn't just torment me, she taught me how to interrogate myself. And so anytime I'm approaching a topic like this, I mean, internally it is like, turning over every rock to see, am I trying to retaliate? Am I, is there a point to this? And on a personal level, especially with some of Colby's issues, I genuinely want him to have every benefit to be able to move forward and build a good life for himself and for his kids. But I do feel like at this point, if I don't address these issues, this is just going to be too easy for the Cox family to keep offering this up as I believe part of their motivation is just to offer a peace offering to Lori, because any statements that they have made, whether in court, these recorded calls, being interviewed by the media, they are seen as disloyalty to Lori. Like, you can't, you are either all for Lori or you are against her. So I'm sure she is now sitting in her jail cell, going over all of the ways everyone has betrayed her, because she sees herself as the perennial victim in all of this. She still sees herself as the victim, even when so much compelling evidence was presented at trial to show, no, you were the perpetrator, Lori. You were not the victim. You may have been victimized, and I do believe that she was victimized in multiple ways, but a lot of perps are. Like, you probably don't see too many perps who came from the Cleaver family. They have some history of trauma and, who knows what else, abuse themselves. So, and all of that abuse establishes a context for the battle. It doesn't excuse their actions. It just makes it much more difficult for people who experience, especially early childhood abuse, to then go on and become stable adults. So anyway, all that to say, I just feel like at this point, when Summer made that statement, I pretty soon thereafter came to the conclusion, I need to address this. And the way I put it in my last live is, I need to put a bridge out sign so that it just is a little bit harder for them to go there. And in this case, even members of the media were echoing Colby's allegations, even when that wasn't the topic. These different members of the media were like, just want to remind everyone that Colby recently made an allegation against Joe that he is a PEDO. And so anyway, okay, so that That's the background. A few notes about A Murderous Heart. So someone mentioned in a comment that she was given a survey after I think she had commented on my last community post and was presented with a survey asking her what she thought of the post, which to me was a red flag that I've already said I do strongly believe that these family members are stirring up trouble in multiple ways. Some of these family members are notorious for operating through a small army of sock puppets. We saw that early on with Cool Cats. Anytime three family members in particular, and I'll just name them, is Colby, Adam, and Kay. Anytime those family members were mentioned, we would get an uprising of accounts that had all the telltale signs of sock puppet accounts. We would give them an opportunity to do like a 5-second video call, and they would say, oh, I'm at work. They were always at work, or whatever. They wouldn't do the call, and so they would stay booted. But I do strongly suspect that these family members, depending on the topic of the live, they're here in the lives. They're either acting as trolls or just trying to kick up a bunch of dust to cause distractions, because there just isn't compelling evidence at this point that there's like an army of actual trolls, like from verified accounts, still fighting for these family members. I think at this point, most of the trolls are just kind of like, they're FOIA docs, and I think a lot of people who early on kind of supported these family members and came after me with tar and feathers are now kind of looking at this like they sincerely want the truth. And so I do think that most of the trouble that's been stirred up has been from the family members who are being discussed at the time. So having said that, I did create backups of all of my videos from A Murderous Heart. I have never once encouraged people to like the videos or subscribe. It's not a flex. It's not trying to attain some higher moral ground. I'm not actively promoting this channel or marketing this channel. And when this case is over, I will walk away and I will go back to talking about data. But after I go through the FOIA docs, but that are released from Idaho. Having said that, I did, create these backups because there is the chance, I think it's still a relatively small chance that the channel will be shut down. I don't think the risk is zero, especially with some of the videos that were taken down. And it's not because I use the word murder or things like that. You just can't use those words if you're monetizing. There are no terms of service, rules about not using those words. You just can't monetize, but I've never monetized this channel and I never plan to monetize this channel. So it's not because I use the word murder. The word murder is in the name of the channel. So I appreciate people's advice, but it's just not valid. I strongly believe these videos have been taken down because there have been reports. That said, I weigh it because at the same time, I do know I actually went through the privacy statement, YouTube's privacy statement, just to see what they collect. Because as an analyst, I wanted to know, does YouTube collect device IDs? And it does. It collects a number of identifying dimensions, you might call it, that identify a user. So it has, a sock puppet, obviously, they'll have multiple users going, even in the chat in one particular live. However, they're using the same devices, unless they have like a whole bunch um, of burner phones. But even then they're going to have repeats of IP addresses and things like that. So I do feel that even though YouTube, I think this channel has tripped some algorithmic measures where YouTube's trying to assess, is this a dangerous channel? I think at the same time, it can most likely see these are the same accounts, reporting the videos. That said, discretion is the better part of valor. So I did create these backups. I may at some point just throw them all out on the A Murderous Heart Facebook page. That's a public page. I use it much more now than the group, because I don't have time to go through all of the requests to join the group. But anyway, and Facebook is much more fair. Like, the same videos have been reported to Facebook, and Facebook so far hasn't taken any of the videos down. So, okay. All right. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen, and we will jump into the presentation. Okay. I had this all set up. Good. Okay. All right, I am just going to open up my other device just to make sure that this is showing, that you can see my screen. I'm not seeing the screen yet, but I couldn't see the screen last time, and it's because it was publishing to Facebook. So can someone let me know if you see the presentation? All right, someone just drop in here if you, okay, great. Thank you, Ellen. Okay, I did update this screenshot. This is the petition that I have urging Phoenix Police to open an investigation into Joe's death. If you are so inclined to sign it, you can reach it at bit.ly/Justice for Joe, JSTC, the number 4, JOE. Okay, this live absolutely comes with major trigger warning. If you are a victim of SA, please exercise caution in attending this live. One thing that has happened in the past is we have had, and again, I may sound paranoid, but I suspect most of this has been family members just kicking up dust. But we have had pretty significant disturbances in the lives of people, saying this is just really triggering, and sharing details, really details about their own personal experience. And the problem with that is, my mods, I have the most amazing team of mods, and I added new mods this week. I don't know if they're here, but they will be showing up more and more. Oh, I see Find Summer's Truth is in here. She joined the moderator team, and thank you so much. And we're going to have a few more moderators join the team, just to kind of spread some of the responsibility. But our moderators also want to listen, and they want to engage. And when someone comes in and just kind of like takes over with talking about their own experiences, especially when they're saying like addressing this topic, or they may identify with the person that I'm talking about, and then just becomes all about like, oh, this just isn't fair to Colby because yada yada yada. That will actually, for this live, we're going to have a kind of stricter parameters on the live. So first of all, if you are a victim, please protect your mental health. Like, nothing is more important than protecting your mental health. There are going to be some kind of stricter playground rules for this particular live for a couple of reasons. One, I want to, this is a really, really delicate topic, and I want to be fair to Colby, but at the same time, there is the chance that some of Colby's victims could be in the live. So, if they're seeing, or even victims of SA, or even potentially like people who are victims of false allegations, which I believe I will make a case that that is what happened in this case. We just want to be careful all the way around. So, so kind of, statements that are made from someone's lizard brain kind of are like basest, drivers are like labels, like he's a liar, or I can't say the word, you can figure it out, and things like that. It's much better to say he lied about, if there's something that is verified. So we have, like, there are lots of verified lies that we have that Colby has claimed, and that's a weird way to say it. There are lots of screenshots that I have presented that have shown that Colby has been dishonest. So just try to be specific. Like, he lied about this. If it's something that you believe, but it hasn't been proved, then you just say, I don't believe this claim, or I think he lied about that. But be very careful not to state things as fact that you just believe. Another thing, please, no mocking. Not in this live. I'm not a big fan of mocking in any of the lives, but please be especially careful in this live. My moderators, if you see something that's just particularly cruel or over the top, please just delete the comment, put the person in a timeout. If it's really over the top, ban them, and just grab a screenshot, and then I'll look back over the chat and decide if the ban will be permanent. Another thing we want to avoid are statements that are just kind of hyperbolic, like, it's crazy he waited so long to make an outcry. No, that's actually a valid thing. Like, that can be valid. So the length of time that passed before Colby made an outcry is not something I take issue with. But it would be fair to say, something like, to ask questions, like, be curious instead of judgmental. Why did he wait so long to make an outcry? Something like that. Something that bothers me so much, so much. I would say that this is a borderline trigger for me. Statements like, he didn't have a chance with Lori for a mother. Let me just tell you, as someone who was a victim of really severe abuse, like, basically take the book, A Child Called It, dial it back a couple of notches, and that's the way I grew up. And I'm not saying that for pity. I don't need anyone's pity. I've already talked about an aspect of my neurodiversity, I guess you would call it, is I can't even really process it, and I think that's in part due to how I grew up. But statements like that are just, like, at minimum chalk against a chalkboard, because they're so deterministic. You're basically saying, if you come from a background of abuse or dysfunction, you're going to be effed up, you know, like, and my particular belief is you things that come easier for people who came from, you know, stable, loving homes will come much more difficult for you. It establishes the context for current battles, but it is not deterministic. And I will, you know, hopefully wrap up with the point of I really, really hope that Colby gets the help that he needs. I know one time I watched one of his lives and he talked about, and I don't say this like to make fun of his beliefs, but he was talking about getting deliverance from leaders in his church, and that's, you know, I'm a Christian. I'm familiar with that kind of mentality, and it's like this mentality that, like, instead of having to work through some of these, you know, serious issues like trauma or, you know, whatever, you just get prayer, and it's like just a miraculous kind of thing. And Colby had even said in that live, like, I used to struggle with this, but then I got, you know, this deliverance prayer, and now, and he was kind of uh, prone to making hyperbolic statements. So it was like, oh, it used to be horrible, horrible, horrible. Then this, you know, miracle happened. And now I don't struggle with those things. And I'm not making fun of him. I am so grateful that when I was in my 20s and, you know, like making my way and figuring out the world around me without a strong compass, there was no internet. And I'm so glad. So a lot of the biggest mistakes that I made, there's really no record of them, thankfully. But it's much better to say something like his upbringing would make it harder for him to make good choices as an adult. All right, so right, having said that, oh, and you know, absolutely, like in other lives, we're a little more patient with, you know, statements like, I just feel sorry for Colby. I mean, very patient. That is valid. What is not valid is to spam the chat with defending everything that he did out and saying like, oh, well, you know, he just grew up in this cult. No, he didn't grow up in this cult. Like, Lori joined this cult when he was an adult. I mean, he was married and a father when he started, when Lori went all in this, or an expectant father, when she really went all in this cult, you know. But anyway, so I mean, at this point, if someone is just spamming the chat with really irrational defenses of everything that a particular family member has done, we're going to operate under the assumption you are probably that family member. So just don't do that in this particular chat. Okay. All right. So I always try to not operate under the assumption that anyone listening to the live will be privy to all of the background. So I am going to play the video snippets of Colby's recent allegations. By recent, I mean his allegations that he made as an adult. Okay, so it kicked off in May 2020 in an interview that he did with Dateline. And a little bit of background, within, I think maybe a 2 to 3 week period, multiple members of the Cox family went on these, well, really, they were like media tours. It was like a media blitzkrieg by the Cox family. And there were two main, I don't know, lines of reasoning or arguments or allegation, not even allegations, two main claims that they all kind of focused on. One was Lori was a wonderful mother, and two, Joe was a pedophile. And so it was actually a little bit of background, not that it's particularly necessary, but the whole reason I started the dashboard project, which was where I had, an army of volunteers and people who were paid to transcribe all of these different video interviews. And I also went through and ran OCR on the FOIA docs that had been released at that time. And I built out this searchable dashboard because they were not only contradicting each other in like their timelines and some of their claims, at times they were contradicting themselves from interview to interview. So this was part of that, kind of media blitzkrieg.
But, said Colby, he did not have an easy time with his stepfather at all.
He went out of his way to make a point when he would like spank me, and then he just did weird things like little hits in the head, like thought it was funny. So there's a lot of stuff with that.
Okay.
And he was sexually abusive as well.
With you?
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing that was interesting is, and it just occurred to me now, I didn't include it, but in that same segment of the interview, he actually talked about how Joe was a good father to Tylee, and he postulated that he thought it was because Tylee was, actually his biological child, but that doesn't line up with the some of the details that we'll see in the FOIA docs. But anyway, that was the outcry he made on Dateline, and then he echoed this outcry in his Netflix documentary.
Well, I remember telling my mom about the sexual abuse. I was like 8 years old. I didn't even know how to explain what had happened, but I told her how he abused me and what he was doing. And I remember her just being kind of silent. I just remember feeling like I did something wrong. I just felt like I ruined her life. Like that's where it started. That was like the breaking point for her.
Okay.
Well, I remember telling my mom about this.
This is just a bug in Google Slides. It just replays the video. He says in this video, and we'll circle back to this, that he feels like by telling his mom about these SA allegations, he ruined her life because that was the beginning of the end for her. But I do hope that one day he can acknowledge how much he ruined Joe's life in his participation. Okay, so I am going to go back on camera because I don't have slides for this. I'm going to talk a little bit about my family's experience. So again, this is a tough topic to address, but I do think that it's important to address because I first met Colby when he was, I think, 6, and that was just me. My glasses, push my hair out. That was just me. Like Joe flew me out, and so I think he was mostly with Barry and Janice at that time, but I did meet him. He hung out, but then the 2 years later, so this was in 2004, Joe wanted to fly my family out because he wanted all the cousins to be together. Let me back up. On the 2002 trip, so Lori was pregnant with Tylee. There was an incident with Colby. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was significant enough that I talked to Joe about it. I didn't know Lori very well, but what had happened in this situation was I was in a room and Colby had come in. He had closed the door and he had asked if he could give me a foot massage. So I just said, "Oh no, thank you," and he kind of kept insisting. And now, when I read these notes, it's interesting because uh, some of these issues were addressed, and Joe was asked about them. So I could actually see where Joe and Lori both in their interviews exaggerated some of these points, and both of them even lied about particular details. And I do understand at that point, Joe was fighting for custody. Um, but uh, but what had happened was Colby kind of kept insisting, and it's sort of like I went to get up and he tried to kind of block the door, which Joe like exaggerated in his retelling. But I mean, obviously Colby was 6. I didn't feel blocked, but I just let Joe know, hey, you know what, this situation happened. You might want to just talk with Colby and let him know that this isn't something that he wants to do. And, like this isn't really appropriate. This is like basically a bit, potentially a budding foot fetish. But I was, just like, and, he needs to be taught, like if someone says no, that needs to be the end of it. So again, not a big deal. I have honestly said I thought Colby was adorable. I mean, he was very sweet. He was very, very tenderhearted. Um, like he was definitely a mama's boy. Like he was like, kind of like more whiny, which was, in keeping with his more tenderhearted personality. But even in that visit, I was like, oh boy, I hope that Colby doesn't become a Tom trigger. Who's Tom? Tom was one of our brothers, and there were 5 of us. He was the second youngest. I was the baby. And the rest of us were like your kind of typical Irish, like um, fair to middling in height. Like the guys were maybe 5'9", 5'10". I was 5'5". My sister was 5'2", which killed her because I was younger. And then my brother Tom was like baby Huey, like we called him the milkman's kid because he was 6'3" and big guy, and anyway, and he was also, his personality was very similar to Colby's, very tender-hearted, some of the same issues. I mean, we all have like positive and not so positive aspects to our personalities. But Joe and Tom hated each other. I mean, like that is not an exaggeration. They hated each other, and Tom Joe had very little patience for Tom's, kind of more emotional personality. And, Joe was like type A, majorly type A, and, militant. Um, and so I was a little concerned even early on, like, okay, we'll see how this plays out. But in that visit, Joe was very sweet with Colby, and they really had like a positive vibe. Like I think at that time, he was teaching him to do something. I think it was like ride a bike, and they were building their home. So we went over to the home that they were building, and Joe was like Mr. Spare No Expense. So Colby had like the nicest of everything. And so, but fast forward to 2006. So I would not have shared that story if it hadn't. Where I'm going with this is, I think what you'll see is a pattern of Lori running interference for Colby. So Joe did talk to Lori before I left, which was fine. And so Lori did give me an explanation of why Colby was into feet. And I was like, that's fine. Just and I wasn't offended. I wasn't like, this is a little punk. I was just like, I just didn't, I see a situation like that. And I'm like, he could do this to the wrong person, like a friend's mom or something like that. And yeah, I just didn't want him to get hurt. And anyway, so fast forward to 2006. Now my kids are on this trip, and Lori said to me at one point, and I mean, God is my witness on these things. I absolutely, there would be nothing in it for me to make up things. Like this whole story is already stranger than fiction. But I do think that it kind of my um, overlaps with this family, I think does help inform where some of these issues ballooned up. And so anyway, it's 2006. My kids are with me, and Lori came to me and said that Colby wanted to give one of my girls a foot rub, but a foot massage, but he was afraid that she would say no and would make fun of him. And this particular daughter was older than Colby by a few years, I think 5. And so I was just like, oh, okay. At that point, like, we're all in this house together. So I just kind of took that. I'm not a big reactor. I'm very much a processor, if you haven't figured that out by now. So I just called my girls into a room and said, I just wanted to, keep everyone calm. But at the same time, I just wanted to let them know, hey, if Colby, because I did tell Lori like something like, yeah, that's probably not going to be a good idea. But I said, if Colby asks to give any of you a foot massage, please be kind, but just say no. So my girls were like, I was, shh, like, please don't do that. Like, so and my oldest remembers this talk. So the concern there, though, was we had already had this conversation. Maybe Lori didn't remember, or maybe she just didn't care. But we had already had this conversation with Colby wanting to give me a foot massage. And now here she is running interference, and obviously with the hope that I would talk to that daughter and say, hey, you know what, if Colby asked to give you a foot massage, he's kind of worried that you might say no, or that you might make fun of him, so just kind of go along with it, which was never going to happen. Absolutely, that was not going to happen. So it never came up. Colby, hopefully either got the message from Lori, like, oh no, abort mission, or just didn't work up the nerve. I know that daughter also just kind of kept him at arm's length, which was fair. So fast forward to our last vacation with them. Now, at this point, Joe and Lori are divorced. Lori and Charles are married. This was the 2007 vacation. And I wasn't sure if this particular topic came up in the 2004 vacation or the 2007 vacation, but this particular daughter is like practically Rain Man when it comes to memory. And she remembered it was definitely the 2007 vacation. So I'm going to go, and I did think that this interaction that I'm about to talk about also happened on the 2007 vacation. So fast forward to 2007. This particular daughter is a teenager. Colby was 10 or 11. But Lori said to me, um, Colby asked me, hey, since this particular daughter and he weren't related by blood, uh, would they be able to get married? And so at that point, just the fact that Lori was bringing this up to me, I was just like, like, yeah, obviously there were boundary issues. But at that point, then I did talk to that daughter and just said, you need to keep, I mean, it wasn't something I needed to encourage her to do, but at the same time, I just kind of felt like I really needed to monitor this, because the concern in these different incidents is what was that Lori's role in this. Like, I have a son. If my son had come to me and had said he wanted to, ask someone else's daughter to, give her a foot massage, I would have said, flag on the play. Absolutely not, absolutely not. No. And and then if he, I mean, because kids can have like innocent crushes and things like that. So I'm not puritanical, I'm not like, idealistic. I understand that these things can happen, but I think it's the parents' role to guide their kids and to teach them what are appropriate boundaries. And so having had the situation that I had with Colby, which wasn't a big deal in 2002, but the fact that if these issues were coming back up in 2004 and then again in 2007, with Lori still playing an active role in, like, so she told me that she told Colby, like, no, yeah, there wouldn't be any restriction because you're not related by blood. And I was just like, oh brother, like, this is I was much more concerned about Lori's role than Colby. And at that point, like, I mean, the difference between like a mid-teenager and a 10 or 11-year-old is like basically like the equivalent of like 15 years in adult years. So and my older kids got along very, very well with Cole, and my son with Zach. And there were no issues with Cole and Zach. I'm not just trying to like be unfair to Colby. There just weren't any issues. They were really, really sweet kids, and they just all got along. So okay, all right. So that was the background. We will kind of circle back to this point later on in the chat. So, okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation and we will continue on. Okay, so now we're going to start digging into Colby's early allegations. These are backed up in the FOIA docs as well as the notes. So first of all, I owe a debt of gratitude to a group called Wicked Truths and F-Bombs, shortened to WTAF. When Colby made his allegation, and this was unbeknownst to me, and in fact, this was the thing that that triggered a lot of like some of these trolls who were coming after me, like the Twitter troll, like 600 tweets, I think, in like a little more than 600 tweets, and I think it was like in a period of 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, it was so over the top. And these trolls were under the assumption that only a family member could have ordered, they referred to it as ordering these FOIA docs. And I had no idea that the level of detail that was released in these documents could even be released in FOIA docs. But I had absolutely nothing to do with it. They were the ones who ordered them and they paid for them. And I'm sure it was a pretty penny because there was a lot to these documents. And at that point, I was in the True Crime Underground TCU group. The group had since been shut down. Um, and one of the admins gave me a 20-minute heads up that these documents were going to be shared in their group. So, I mean, at that point, I was like, why even giving me? I mean, I appreciated that they gave me any heads up, but obviously I wasn't going to be able to review these massive documents in 20 minutes. I couldn't even run OCR on them in that length of time. But that's how much of a heads up that I was given. And the entire reason, I've never talked to them about why they ordered the FOIA docs, but it was after Colby's allegation. And so I don't say this to be cruel or mean, but Colby kind of brought this on himself. I just can't imagine that these documents would have been ordered had it not been for these allegations. And this group, they just started digging in and addressing the allegations. And in time, I also made my way through part of the document. Honestly, it's just this document is so unbelievably sad because there were mistakes made on so many levels, and I don't want to address those. But Joe was victimized so much more than the public even knows. I mean, the drama that was going on behind the scenes, even with like people who were tasked with investigating the allegations, a lot of balls were dropped. And at one point, a judge had even ruled that someone from the deputy's office or the sheriff's office, or it was interesting because they said the sheriff's office or constable, and I didn't even think that was a thing here in the U.S. Needed to go to Lori's home, that there were grave concerns about Tylee's safety and about Lori being a flight risk. And and they were tasked with going to Lori's home and retrieving Tylee and turning her over to Joe. And they tried for 2 days. Lori didn't come to the door. And then another judge overruled the order of the first judge and said, no. Joe should be given supervised visitation. Okay, so like he was so close to being able to protect Tylee. And I mean, again and again, I couldn't even make it all the way through the documents. But okay. Whoops. Okay, so one thing I want to clarify, I mentioned early on in the live that there were things that I learned even in preparing for this live that I hadn't known before. And this is one of the times I will share a screenshot. It might be the only time I share a screenshot from the notes. And that's just for me, for transparency's sake, because I have been saying that according to these notes, Tylee didn't make an outcry. And you see here, it's the date is May 7th, 2007. And it said there were 2 evaluations done by CPS and noted. Now this person is like taking notes. I'm assuming this person probably recorded some of their conversations with these different people and then just like took notes afterwards. because there are lots of like spelling errors, grammatical errors and stuff. I mean, this is very stream of consciousness, definitely almost like shorthand. Okay, so it noted that there were videos, and it said the first, which was in August 2006, so Colby was 10 at that time, the first set showed no outcry from either child. Tylee disclosed no info at all, says Lori was beside herself over the issue. Later, we did a second interview with Colby. Now this, we'll find out that this was November 2006. So the first was August, the second interview was November. Then he gave all this additional info. Why is he giving us all this additional info now? And then later in the notes, noted talking to someone else who had interviewed Colby, and this person said, discussed my interview with him concerning the detective, CPS, and nanny, discussed different aspects of their interview. Very strange that Colby can have, and it should be an interview, and not make an outcry. And then there's his note is vague, and 3 to 4 months later, he has this clarity in thought. Head injuries just do not work like this. So why is this person saying head injuries? We'll get to this, but this will just be kind of a sneak peek. Colby had said when the detective interviewing him said, hey, why are you sharing all these details now when we just interviewed you a few months ago and you didn't have these details? And Colby had said it was because he had a head injury. And he said that when he heard Tylee's story, he remembered more details. Well, Tylee didn't make an outcry. So a lot of Colby's claims were met with suspicion, but this was one of the reasons it was met with suspicion. And that this person notes head injuries just do not work like this. And this head injury was a bicycle accident, and Lori and Joe were together at that time because it's referenced in the notes. In one of Joe's interviews, he mentioned this this accident, and that he took he rented a wheelchair so that Colby could go with them. I think it was like to a baseball game or something like that. Anyway, also discuss the mattress issue, which we will discuss, and why they would not provide the mattress. The mattress was key. They have the mattress. Charles got married in May of 2006. Later, there are allegations, and these are details that are not pertinent to this discussion. And one of the things that I just want to note here is I'm going to be very careful. I know that other channels have talked about some of the other allegations that were made against Colby. I'm not going to go into the details just because some of these alleged victims are alive. And so I want to be very careful to protect their right to privacy and to not tell their stories. So some of it will be pretty obvious, and the information is already out there that, and this was Charles and Cheryl's sons, but I'm just not going to discuss the details. But one thing, so a few things here is, I definitely, when I went through the notes, because you'll see in the next slide that Colby did make an outcry in August. So I want to clarify that. But I also want to say these notes here are why I was under the impression that he didn't make the outcry until later. But another thing that jumped out at me was it never occurred to me that all of this happened pretty soon after Charles and Lori got married. So this note here says that they got married in May of 2006. My notes say that it was February of 2006. So I'm pretty sure it was like February, around Valentine's Day. Not exactly sure, but still, like, so Colby's saying that these things happened in 2004 when he was 8. Um, but the allegations weren't made until 2006. And we will talk about what these kind of coordinate with, but just kind of put in the back of your mind that, a piece of this puzzle is that Lori and Charles had gotten married. So now Lori had more means to be able to take on a very rigorous series of lawsuits. Like at one point, when in even going through these notes, I saw a note about 2009 or 2010, definitely 2009, but possibly also 2010. They were still preparing for another jury trial. This wasn't for a criminal trial, but I mean, they just put Joe through the absolute ringer. Okay, so I found out this week that Colby made an outcry on August 7th, 2006. It said in the FOIA docs, and you can tell these are the FOIA docs because of the WTAF watermark. On or about August 7th, 2006, respondent's 10-year-old son, Colby Ryan, made outcries of SA of him at the hands of petitioner Joseph Ryan. These outcries were immediately reported to the Lakeway Police, who referred respondent to the Hays County Sheriff's Department for jurisdictional reasons. Exhibit 1, a forensic interview of Colby Ryan and his 3-year-old sister, Tylee Ashlyn Ryan, were conducted. So when this person talked about the first interview with CPS, this is what they were talking about. This is the August 2006. Okay, so then in the notes, there were also details about his outcry to Vivian Lewis. Vivian was interviewed by Dateline, and she and the guardian ad litem, his name was Tom Ware. They were both interviewed by Dateline. I can't find that episode anywhere, so if any of you know, if any of you recorded it or know where I might find it, I would be indebted for that, because I would like to have that episode. You can send it to me, send it a link to amurderousheart@gmail.com. Okay, so these were details in the notes. Like I said, a few of the moderators do have the screenshots. So, and Janice Summers is the only person who I passed this document on to. I trust her implicitly. Also, the moderators that I shared it with, I asked them just out of an abundance of caution to please not share it with anyone. So please don't reach out to my moderators and ask them to share. Okay, so Vivian conducted interviews of Joe, Lori, Colby, and Tylee. And in Colby's outcry to her, or interview with her, he said that Joe had, and I'm not going to say this word out loud. Again, this is going to get graphic if you are bothered. I mean, obviously, we're all bothered by this stuff, but if you are particularly sensitive to details of SA, please bounce now. Like this is, it's going to be pretty grisly. Okay, so Colby had told her that Joe had that word, him through his pajamas. So this was a red flag. When he was asked about if there was like blood and scarring, Colby said there was blood in his underwear, but he didn't tell his mom about it. the person who was taking the notes, who had talked to Vivian, had said, difficult to think that the child would not have wildly complained about this at the time. So I'm not sure if this person was quoting Vivian or if this was the person's comment, but I would agree with that. I mean, I think across the board, those investigating the case, heard this detail and thought, is this even physically possible? And if this had been done, the damage would be really significant and would have required medical attention, immediate medical attention. But I do not think that this is physically possible. But then the fact that Colby had said, "Oh yeah, there was blood, but he just didn't tell his mom about it," was obviously met with skepticism. Then he was interviewed by a detective. And I think the Vivian interview was somewhere after the outcry, uh, or right before. This was around the time, and there wasn't a date on that interview, so I don't know the actual date of that interview. But I'm assuming it was in this November timeframe because of the person's notes that, August, the allegations were vague. In fact, they were so vague, and we'll get to this at some point, they didn't meet the Texas laws requirements for SA. So that's why they couldn't pursue it as a criminal case before November. They just said this doesn't meet the standard. So in his interview with the detective, the detective was the one who had noted that Colby's outcry in August was vague, but now he provided significant additional information that was met with skepticism. He, meaning Colby, said it was because he had a head injury and didn't remember the details until after he heard Tylee's story. And I've already noted Tylee hadn't made an outcry, so that was also met with some skepticism. And Tylee didn't make an outcry in August or November. So, I'm sure, this is me filling in the spaces here, but I would imagine that they were like, well, what about Tylee's story would have reminded you about all of these graphic details because she hasn't made an outcry. And at that point, he said he couldn't remember if his pajama pants were up or down, so that was noted as a contradiction, a potential contradiction. The detective also asked about blood, and Colby said that there was blood, but he didn't tell his mom about it, so that was consistent with what he had told Vivian Lewis, according to these notes. But then this was one of the details that I think really kind of hosed their case. The detective asked, again, I'm not going to keep saying according to these notes. These are all, like, if it doesn't include a screenshot, these are according to those notes. The detective asked Lori later about blood, and she said that there was blood in Colby's underwear, but she didn't take him in anywhere. So that was met with pretty significant skepticism. Like, wait, it doesn't make sense that a kid would see blood, especially having experienced something so horrific, and not have mentioned it to his mom. But then for the mom to be like, oh, she's having to think on her feet here. Like, oh, Colby said that there was blood. Oh yeah, there was blood. But I didn't take him in anywhere. So that just didn't pass muster. Okay. The detective wanted the mattress because in Colby's allegations, he said that a jar of that substance, I'm not going to say it out loud, and the allegation about these like baby food jars of that substance that came from Joe. I mean, they were pretty outlandish. I mean, Joe would have had to have been a raging psychopath. But I think what happened was Colby, he has this gravitational pull toward hyperbole, and he was also a kid. Now, I think at this point, I know a lot of people are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that Lori probably just told him so much all through his growing up that he had been essayed, that she brainwashed him. Because of these details, and details that I will cover later in the live, I don't believe that Colby was brainwashed. And again, it's not to be unfair. I think that I think Colby got kind of swept away in. I think Colby has some of Lori's gravitational pulls toward, telling these big stories, getting, caught up in the moment, not being tethered by, truth. And that was the example that was set for him. So Colby had said that one of these jars had spilled on the bed. So of course the detective was like, okay, we need the mattress. And the notes had identified that Lori was apprehensive. That's the word the notes used about Lori. But then it says that Charles called in and was belligerent and refused to turn over the mattress, and went so far as to say they weren't going to find anything on the mattress. So the detective in these notes, the note taker noted that the detective said this screams a child custody case, and said that they have destroyed their chance for a criminal case. And the Hays County grand jury, as I mentioned earlier, no-billed the case due to lack of evidence and issues with Colby's statements. There were also notes in these notes that Vivian had said that she can't trust what Colby says. So it was noted that in May 2007, this person talked with Vivian Lewis, who again she did everyone's assessments, but she did the really comprehensive assessment on Joe, which I will read the segments of that. And I actually found it on Reddit, and so I will provide a link to it. Okay, so Vivian Lewis told the person who passed on their notes that she didn't find Colby's story credible. She also didn't know that he had done 2 interviews with CPS, or that the first outcry was vague. And I'm just noting that this person noted the first outcry was vague and didn't fit the definition of SA by Texas law. The second time, his allegations were very detailed, which was met with suspicion. So I think because I think there was just kind of like a reconvening after they had said, there just isn't, it hadn't even gone to the grand jury. If I understand the notes correctly, the detectives or someone involved said this doesn't meet the statute. We can't move forward with this. So then in November, Colby came back with very, very detailed allegations. Okay. She also hadn't heard about his head injury explanation. It was a concern both times that Tylee 3 and 4 respectively didn't corroborate Colby's claims. And it was also noted that Vivian expressed concern that the therapist who interviewed them was an intern. So this was new information to me. I hadn't caught this before. Vivian said this case was too complicated for an intern. It needed someone who was licensed and had significant experience with essay allegations in divorce cases. And that we'll circle back to that because that comes up in her assessment. It's not forwarding. What's going on? Let me make sure. Okay. Okay, it also said in the FOIA docs, it should also be noted that with regard to the outcry made by Colby Ryan, results from the most recent CPS investigation did note the following. The outcry is described as suspect by law enforcement due to the inconsistencies in his story. There is also concern regarding the unwillingness of Ms. Vallow to provide law enforcement with Colby's mattress, evidence that could be crucial to the criminal investigation. Also, Tom Ware, who was the guardian ad litem. He was the previous guardian ad litem, I should state. He was removed from the case, and then a new guardian ad litem was brought in later. But he testified on May 9th, 2007, as to the following when asked whether he knew of any professional, quote, who believes Colby's allegations. At this point, Tom had said, I know of no professional that I have spoken to that believes these allegations. It goes from the sheriff's, the detective. It goes from the CPS worker, secondhand through the therapist. The kid's been in the kid, meaning Colby, has been in 9 months of therapy, still nothing. Okay, so now we're going to dive into Vivian Lewis's assessment specifically of Joe. So this is not going to, I mean, obviously it's in relation to these allegations. You can see that yourself by going to bit.ly/JR for Joe Ryan sex assessment, separated by hyphens. Okay, so this is going to get a little academic, sort of, but this was part of the assessment that Vivian had to do. And I remember seeing parts of these notes because very early on in the case, and I've mentioned this before, a reporter had reached out to me. Right now I'm blanking on her name. She's one of my favorite reporters. I just can't remember her name. She had reached out to me and said, hey, do you realize that Tylee never made an outcry against Joe? And I was like, wait, what? And she passed this screenshot. It was something that she had marked up. So I'm kind of glad to have like a fresh screenshot because I kept having to tell people like, oh, these notes aren't mine, these highlights aren't mine. Garna Mieja, absolutely love her. But so she was the first one to let me know that Tylee had never made an outcry against Joe. So, and this screenshot was one of the screenshots she had sent to me. So I'm just going to read it. The field of child sexual abuse became active in the early 1970s. By the early 1980s, those of us old enough to remember this time of new work and absolute objectivity as possible. Now there are some like grammatical errors, so sometimes it can be kind of difficult to read this. But anyway. So I think she's trying to say those of us trying to maintain as much objectivity as possible discovered that in cases of false accusations and situations where recantations should be studied, remember clearly the data and protocols determined by specialists such as Jan Hinman, Dr. Cece, this examiner, so she is referring to herself, and many more. We discovered that only about 2% of cases are false accusations. We now know from work at Emory University that less than 17% of cases have medical evidence. So this is important to note. This is, she had to weigh this, that, okay, just because there wasn't medical evidence in Colby's outcry, that isn't cause to rule it out. It's also notable that only about 2% of cases are false accusations. So that's a very small number. So, these things are weighing in Colby's favor and against Joe at this point. And I appreciate her objectivity. She took a very scientific approach, as she was compelled to do. So with this history in mind, let's look at the data. So she goes down these litmus tests, if you will, and she cites the litmus tests. So there are these kind of qualifying questions and then answers them. So the first one, is there a custody dispute? She notes, yes. And there has been for nearly 4 years. The quote hysteria seems to repeatedly be connected to pornography. To date, no history of child, that word, has been illuminated. So Lori was alleging that Joe engaged in child, that word. Because, like I said in a previous slide, you can't just divorce these Cox family members and walk away with your dignity intact. We have now seen it with Charles. We've seen it with Brandon. I mean, we see it in the documents with Stacy and Steve Cope. The same thing, there's just this like circling of the wagons and these outrageous allegations against these men who married into the family and then tried to leave. Okay, the father who uses that word seems to be fairly open and honest regarding this interest and the need, like for example, medicine storage, that word should be locked up and kept away from children. So basically, he had said he looks at that, but that it, he locks it away, keeps it out of the reach of children. She notes 93% of false allegations have custody dispute being argued in a court of law. So you take that 2%, so only 2% of accusations are false. But of that 2%, so that 2% can still account for, hundreds of thousands of cases of that. So that becomes its own population. Of that population, 93% have a custody dispute within that context with being argued. So that works in Joe's favor and kind of against Lori and Colby. So you can see, like, in this testing, and by the way, this testing was 8 hours. Joe had to answer these questions. He had to look at pictures. I don't know what they were. I mean, some of the things that I know, I never needed to know about my brother because I have more detailed records, but would have really preferred not to know any of this stuff. But I mean, this was 8 hours of exhaustive questionings about his childhood, about his sexual proclivities. I mean, all of these things. I mean, very, very intrusive, and he had to pay for it. Is there a confederate? And she, explains in parentheses, a single and consistent person who continues to make accusations of SA. She answers yes. Does this confederate show signs or medical histories of histrionic, paranoia, fanaticism, and or borderline personality? She answers yes. And now that has been well established. And some of the things that Lori even told Vivian It's astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing. I mean, keep in mind, this is Lori putting her best foot forward, and she makes some really bizarre statements. Okay. The most common Confederates are Caucasian females, usually the mother, Caucasian maternal grandmothers, or Latinos. And she notes, yes, this is a Caucasian female. Is there a situation between the mother and the alleged injured child that seems symbiotic or injurious? She said no. I would actually argue at this point that she and Colby did have a symbiotic relationship. I mean, that just means like, like their actions support each other's agenda. But I don't think that Vivian would have necessarily been aware of that symbiosis. And at that point, it may not have come up in her interview, because you could see that there were things that Colby said to the detective that he didn't say to Vivian, and vice versa. Are there professionals involved in the case who may have a predetermined notion of the facts of the case? She notes perhaps. And she, like I said, she specifically flagged concerns about the therapist who interviewed the kids, because she's like, what do you mean? I mean, I was surprised when I was reading through the notes, like, wait, the therapist who interviewed them was an intern? Like, what in the world? Anyway, okay. Has the child been repeatedly interviewed? Yes. Does there appear to be a pattern of moving the child from professional to professional, or taking the child repeatedly to the same professional in an effort to, quote, get a statement that no one has heard but the Confederate? Yes. And I think especially with Tylee. Has a professional or professionals with forensic background interviewed the child and seen no reason for protection? Yes. Has the child made a statement to any skilled and specifically trained professional that he or she has not been sexually abused, essayed, and of great import made a statement to that professional that he or she is being coached? She says yes, and we will look at that. I've already talked about this before, but in Tylee's case, Tylee said yes. Yes, she was being coached. Does the Confederate have a history of abuse? Unsolved, question mark. And she notes perhaps. Okay, to the point that I had just made, it was noted during an interview on March 23rd, 2007, with the mother and child, Tylee. In this particular case, this came from the notes, but I included it because it's just too many details to, ask people to trust me that I am summarizing correctly. This examiner utilized a formal interview protocol. During that interview, Tylee was asked, "Who is Joe?" Answer: "He is my old daddy. My new daddy is Charles." The child was asked, "Has Joe ever hurt or injured you?" No. Repeated her answer, no, and she confirmed that no, Daddy Joe has not hurt her. So they had to clarify, because she's calling Charles her new daddy. Okay, we're talking about Daddy Joe. Has Daddy Joe ever hurt you? She said no. The child was asked about the places on her body where the bathing suit fit or go. So you can see where this is going. She recognized this area clearly and free of confusion. This examiner asked, "Has anyone bothered you in those areas, hurt you or tickled you?" All separate. So these were separate questions, and to each question she answered no. This examiner asked, "Has anyone told you or made you come here today and tell me about Daddy Joe?" Child's answer, now keep in mind, Lori was in the room for this. Child's answer, yes. Examiner asked who. Child answered, Colby and Charles. That was the end of the interview. This examiner wanted to stay away from repetitive questions. When the child made these statements, the mother's jaw dropped, eyes widened, and appeared shocked. She did not seem fearful that she was in trouble. Rather, she seemed in disbelief and shock. The mother, Miss Vallow, has explained to me on many occasions that she speaks with her deceased sister and believes that Tylee is reincarnation of her sister. So I believe that this interview was with Vivian, because Vivian does include these details in her assessment. So here Lori is being interviewed by a woman who is tasked with assessing if these SA allegations are believable, legitimate, supported with evidence, free of signs of coercion. And Lori tells her that she speaks with her deceased sister, Stacy, and believes that Tylee is a reincarnation of her sister. So again, how does Summer say up until 2018, she didn't see signs that Lori was delusional? I mean, they obviously all would have heard these things. Well, I shouldn't say obviously. I strongly suspect all of the family members knew about these beliefs. Miss Vallow is deeply religious and seems genuinely so. I really, really appreciate just how fair Vivian is and how fair they all are in their notes. However, she also explained that her last attorney, Mr. Ted Terry, has come to her instructing her to attend his funeral. So her previous attorney, his name was Ted Terry. We've talked about him on this channel and in Cool Cats. He died, it was described as sudden, so he wasn't sick. And that was in, I think, his obituary. And so Lori tells someone, like I said, I believe this was Vivian, although the person writing the notes doesn't identify who the examiner was for these questions, that Lori's being assessed. And she's like, oh, and by the way, my attorney, Ted Terry, has died. And he instructed her to attend his funeral. Who knows, she may have talked about it in the past tense, but she felt like he wanted her to explain to his ex-spouse that he loved her. She also mentions other ghost conversations and directives from her God. So this whole idea of having help from the other side, talking to people on the other side, this wasn't new. This was, people who are like, oh yeah, Chad led her down this primrose path. No, she was primed and ready. This is 2007. It would be another 11 and a half years before, is that right? Am I mathing right? Yeah. 11 and a half years before she would even meet Chad. Okay, so going back. Oh, actually. Oh, you know what? No, this isn't in the notes. This was in Vivian's report. That's right. This all of this came from Vivian's report. Okay, great. Because there were also comments about this in the notes. So I got a little turned around. So yes, these are all statements by Vivian. So her recommendations. A, set about an immediate plan, and she qualifies now, where this child may meet and understand that her real daddy is Joseph Ryan, and it said, and Charles Vallow. She later published corrections, which we will see in the next slide, where she said that should have been Joseph Ryan, not Charles Vallow. But you can also tell from the context. Continue a brief period of counseling to help Mr. Ryan and his family move on through this reunification process. Instruct the biological mother to cease any and all communication and chats with this child about, quote, Daddy Joe being a M word. She should submit and successfully complete a complete psychiatric and psychosexual examination. She should have, so Vivian stated that Lori is the one who should have supervised visits until this case can be more clearly understood. And she even had this ex parte with the judge, which she talked about in the Dateline episode, where she made that appeal. And the judge found, a compelling case for that, and like I said, ordered for Tylee to be picked up from Lori's home and delivered to Joe. Okay, C. Tylee is a very young child, but not that young. She needs to be with her father for long rehabilitative times to make up for the emotional trauma of this volatile and not so private periods of accusations against her father. She should have contact with her father's family, which I found personally compelling. Very, very sweet. Okay, then she published the correction. You can see, whoops. Page 6, the sentence reads that her real daddy is Joseph Ryan and Charles Vallow. This is an error. The sentence should read that her real daddy is Joseph Ryan, not Charles Vallow. But you'll see in a later interview that even though Lori was told by this person, and this was part of her assessment, Lori needs to stop having Tylee call Charles daddy and needs to understand that Joseph Ryan is her daddy. And I've talked about this in other lives. She did the same thing with Colby, because when I was there in 2002, Joe and Lori hadn't even been married a year, because they got pregnant with Tylee pretty soon after they were married. And I was very surprised that Colby was calling Joe dad. Really surprised. And I even asked Lori if Colby's dad was alive, and Lori just dismissed it. Yes, but he's not in the picture. He doesn't want anything to do with Colby. But I still felt like that was a significant misstep. She also, and I've talked about this before, she and Joe both said together that Joe had adopted Colby. It wasn't until this case came out that I found out that Joe hadn't adopted Colby, which meant that Colby's biological father hadn't surrendered his parental rights, I'm assuming. But for whatever, I'm assuming that's why Colby wasn't adopted. They just legally changed his name. Okay. Vivian also said that Colby needs to be investigated. So, diagnostic formulations. Biological father, no access to concerns based on the data collected thus far. Biological mother, rule out histrionic and borderline issues. Rule out religious values that are bordering on fanaticism and the potential impact of 4 years of unverified complaints and investigations of child SA against this child. So she's talking about Tylee. Rule out stepbrother Colby. Colby was actually half brother. Need for intense and thorough investigations of SA against him and by him against others. He may very well be the key to understanding the problems in this case. His bizarre statements about that word assault, I'm not going to say it out loud. Oh gosh, Google Slides is the worst. If I even just move the mouse, it moves the slide. It's this word here. His bizarre statements about blank assault, which we've talked about, the multiple allegations with other little boys and him engaged in SA, and finally some very concerning statements by Tylee that he is telling her what to say about Mr. Ryan are of, and this is a little convoluted, but I think she's trying to say they're flat out unbelievable, but it brings plenty reasons for grave concern. This must be investigated by an experienced and well-respected male forensic professional. Lastly, Ms. Vallow genuinely believes her child is in danger. However, her belief system is riddled with ghosts and seemingly fanatical religious dogma. Her belief that Mr. Terry, may he rest in peace, visits her at night borders on visual and auditory hallucinations. But this examiner is not an expert in her religion and wants to give her as much benefit of the doubt as possible, but not at the expense of this little girl's relationship with her father. At this time, Tylee does not even know Joseph Ryan is her father. Sorry. This comes from the mother and most likely the new stepfather. She has lost touch with that belief system and the opinions of others until she finds someone who will agree that Tylee has been abused. Based on the data of this case and the experience of this examiner, the child, Tylee Ryan, should be reunited with her biological father at the earliest possible time, now, today, at the very time of this reading. A trained and interested professional should follow this work to be of assistance to the child and the father, and to watch out for the safety of this child and her older half-brother. Respectfully submitted, Vivian Lewis. I mean, really tough reading. Okay, just a second, I'm going to get a drink. Another thing that is notable, I'm not going to go back on camera for this, it's a pretty short point. I've mentioned this in another live, but I guess I will go on camera because it feels a little weird. There aren't any slides because this is a conversation that I had. But there is someone who I met through this case who was a client of Lori's for I think it was like 10 years. She still lives in Austin. And so she was Lori's client. She had her hair done by Lori when Lori was single, a single mom, just had Colby, and then through like her marriage to Joe. So she's the only person following the case who has met Joe and really adored Joe. They got along great. So she speaks very positively of Joe. And then she continued to have her hair done by Lori through the separation and the divorce. But one of the things that she told me, which I thought was really interesting, was that she said that Lori talked a lot about, let me just make sure. Okay, I wanted to make sure this wasn't one of my mods. She said that, when Lori was going through the divorce, she talked openly about these SA allegations of Joe with Tylee, and even said like the FBI was investigating him, and so I mean, she's in true Lori fashion. The FBI, there's no indicator, I should say, that the FBI was ever involved in this, and the FBI gets involved with like things that cross state lines, and there wasn't even a criminal case against Joe that was pursued. But I mean, it was pursued, but it was no bill. Do you know what I mean? But this person told me that in all of that time, Lori never said that Joe essayed Colby, only Tylee. And so I just thought that was interesting. I find this person very credible. I've gotten to know her really well over the past few years. I'm not trying to add undue weight. I'm just saying, like, she's not a drama queen. She was not like looking to insert herself into the investigation. She's not out there saying, I knew Lori, I knew Joe, but she started following the case because I think someone else who also had her hair done by Lori mentioned it to this friend. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting, that it did seem like initially the onus of the pressure was put on Tylee to make this outcry. Then at some point there were these allegations that Cheryl made, and I think I actually talked about that in the presentation. So Let me see. I won't go into it if well, we'll see. Um, no, I didn't. So I will, I will talk about this. So, oh, yeah, because I don't have screenshots. Um, so from my best ability to put together a timeline as best as I can, uh, it looks like initially the pressure was on Tylee to make an outcry. And Tylee wasn't making an outcry. Then Tylee kind of, I mean, she was only, I think, 4 at the time that she said Charles and Colby were pressuring her. They knew Lori was pressuring her. Um, but so then Colby made this outcry in early August, and we know that there were allegations that Cheryl had made against Colby, and included in this notes there are references to like a text that Colby had sent, like a text that, gosh, sorry, um, that Colby had sent one of the boys. And this was a picture of Tylee, who was 3 at the time, and it was described as provocative. I thought I had this in my notes. Apparently I don't. But so, and then there were other things that were in text messages. So anything that was in text message, obviously these investigators collected pictures and text messages. Joe had also made an allegation just about something. I don't want to go into the details, but it was something because I there are only passing references and I don't want to fill in the details, but he had taken a picture and the person who was making the notes had described the picture as compelling. Excuse me. Still getting over this cold. But anyway, so and someone had told me, I haven't read Colby's book, but someone said in his book he had said he had confirmed that a judge had ruled that there had to be cameras in the home, and this person said, excuse me, in a comment here on A Murderous Heart or in Cool Cats, that Colby had said it was because of allegations that had been made against him. I can't confirm that. Maybe someone here in the chat can confirm or deny. But so trying to put together the timeline, it appears that, Charles and Lori got married, and maybe their Charles and Cheryl's sons had come, I'm assuming maybe sometime in the summer, and then in these follow-up texts, there were also concerns, allegations of things that Colby did in person with the boys. But so there were text messages, and then there were allegations. And let me emphasize, these were allegations. But so it seems like maybe in the summer break something had happened, and then because there was a note at one point that someone wondered if Colby had made the allegations to get out of trouble himself. So all I can do is try to put together. I feel like, once again, I've said this before, I feel like, especially with this particular live, I have 17 pieces of a 100-piece puzzle. But I think that these pieces are pretty significant. But the picture that Joe had taken and sent to the author of the notes, the author of the notes described the picture as compelling. So I don't know what the picture was of, but it was a concern with an interaction Colby had with Tylee, and it had something to do with bath time. But then that is honestly all I know. Well, a couple other details, but it just had something to do with that. Okay, all right. Okay, so this next piece, I really tried to avoid hyperbolic statements. This was very surprising to me. I'm going to address this in the live. I just found this out this week. So the question is, did Tylee ever make an outcry? And yes, she did. This was in 2008, but well, I'll let you judge for yourself. So, backdrop: the criminal case against Joe had already been no-billed by a grand jury. I believe that was in October of 2007. So this is 2008, and this is an addendum to the Guardian ad litem's report. The new Guardian ad litem was Mary Fogel. So it says here, the treatment team met again today and invited me to attend. We are presenting the following outline of significant events since the June 13 hearing for the court's review. And like I said, there were what seemed like endless hearings and multiple references to, like, there would be an upcoming trial, and I think they were not a trial. Yeah, they were referring to it as a trial, but it was like a custody. Like, one of the things I found this week is that they ordered a new trial because two people had said in the first trial, in reference to Joe's, I guess, like if he should have supervised visitation and the concerns around his parenting. That there was an upcoming criminal trial, and as it turned out, the case had already been no-billed by the grand jury. So then Joe's attorney said, we need to have a new trial because this jury, and I agree, this jury was negatively influenced to think that there was this upcoming criminal trial against Joe, and they were the ones who were somehow deciding, weighing in on the custody issue. Okay, so June 30th, 2008. So, let me finish the backdrop. So the criminal case had been no-billed. At this point, 2007, Colby's allegations, from everything I could tell, they were ruled out. I mean, he had 2 passes at Joe, and there were just too many issues. So Lori couldn't rely on Colby to make this outcry. So it appears that the pressure heightened with Tylee. So June 30th, Tylee tells Leslie Smith that she doesn't want to visit during overnights because Joe, this word, and it's just so ridiculous that we have to do this, but anyway, that Joe, the M word, her and Colby. So a few days later, Tylee tells Dr. Wilcox that this happened when she was 4 years old. As soon as I read this, I mean, immediate red flags. I'm just like, that's impossible, but we'll keep reading. When Dr. W asked her if she ever saw her dad alone when she was 4, Tylee said, no, that was right, that it wasn't last year, it was 4 years ago. Now, I doubt she did the math. She was 5. I doubt she was like when I was 1. But I think so when Tylee was 4, the entire time she was 4, like Joe didn't even see Tylee for 12 months, according to these records. And then he had supervised visitation. And I haven't been able to assess how long this supervised visitation continued. But it sounds like, due to the second judge overruling the first judge's order, it was probably a significant period of time. But Dr. Wilcox caught, wait a minute, how would he have been able to do this? Like he did, so it sounds like he asked an open-ended question, and she said, and I'm not sure actually if Dr. Wilcox is male or female. I thought something indicated that it was a man, but okay, we'll just say they until I know. But anyway, so then Tylee has to think quick on her feet. She's only 5. She has to incorporate, at least this is my understanding. She said she was 4 years old. She was kind of caught. And had to incorporate the 4 and said, oh no, that's right, it was 4 years ago. Well, Tylee would have been 1. So there's already, I'm sure, suspicion, because how would she remember? Not impossible, but highly improbable. And then that same day, Tylee tells me that, so this was in an interview with Mary Fogel, that she doesn't want to spend overnights with Joe because she didn't want to be away from her mommy. No other reason given. So Tylee told Dr. Wilcox that, this essay happened. She didn't tell Mary Fogel the essay story, just that she didn't want to be away from her mommy. A few days later, July 7th, prior to a session, Lori Vallow informs Leslie that Tylee reported seeing needles in Joe's bathroom. During that session, Tylee told Leslie that she saw needles in Joe's bathroom. Few days later, Lori referred to Charles Vallow as Daddy. So think back a year earlier, Vivian Lewis had said, hey, she needs to stop calling Charles Daddy, and Tylee needs to understand that Joe Ryan is her daddy. And there was a note at one point that Tylee, in one of her interviews, referred to Joe as Joseph. Like she didn't even call him Daddy. She called him Joseph. Okay, so Lori referred to Charles Vallow as Daddy to Tylee when they came to Dr. Wilcox's office. She informed Dr. Wilcox that they always referred to Mr. Vallow as Daddy. Same day, Tylee tells Dr. Wilcox that she doesn't want to talk with Joe about being the M word. When asked about that, Tylee became tearful and said he might be mad because, quote, maybe it wasn't true. The next day, Supervisor Kate Caswell reports that Tylee was taking pictures of Joe's bathroom with her cell phone camera. Now, keep in mind, this is 2008. Tylee is 5 years old, and excuse me, she's going to visitation with a cell phone and taking pictures of Joe's bathroom. Excuse me. All right, when Kate asked her why she was doing that, Tylee informed her that her mommy told her to take pictures of Joe's bathroom. A couple days later, Tylee tells Leslie Smith that she didn't talk about being M'd with Joe and Dr. Wilcox because she thought he would be, quote, sad that I remembered. So supposedly sad that she remembered that Joe did this thing when she was 1, and they noted no tearfulness observed. So when she said that, he might be mad because, quote, maybe it wasn't true, she became tearful. But then when she said that she didn't want to talk with him about this because he might be sad that she remembered there was no tearfulness. The treatment team also asked that I not be dismissed as guardian ad litem in an effort to maintain progress and consistency for the child. That makes sense to me. Okay, so the $1 million question, circling back to Colby. Why? Why would he have done this if these allegations weren't true? When he was younger, excuse me, I suspect that there were a couple of possible motivations. Now, keep in mind, we have moved into the conjecture zone. I'm going to take pieces of, what we know and put forth my supposition. Excuse me. I'm going to circle back to a portion of the statement that he made to Keith Morrison with a particular focus.
But, said Colby, he did not have an easy time with his stepfather at all.
He went out of his way to make a point when he would like spank me, and then he just did weird things like little hits in the head, like thought it was funny. So there's a lot of stuff with that.
Okay.
And
okay, so take note, Colby references that Joe did these little hits in the head. In his Netflix documentary, that claim,
But, said Colby,
that claim was embellished. So let's listen to that.
I remember Joe being this very sweet person in the beginning, and then I don't know if he started to be annoyed by me as a little kid, but like everything I did was like annoying to him, like smacking my lips while eating, like that I didn't have these proper manners, but it wasn't like being taught. It was like always a discipline. It just got worse and worse and worse. And it just got to the point where he would just like punch me in the back of the head.
So we still see this gravitational pull Colby has to embellishing claims. So, and I remember when he made the allegation, because I was in the Facebook groups, and I didn't agree with this treatment of the allegations, but some people, rightly so, question his inclusion of like the little hits in the back of the head. But there just wasn't like there were quite a few people, there were a lot of people who believed his allegations, and rightly so. At that point, there wasn't reason to doubt them so much. There wasn't. But I will address some of the issues that people had with him. I also suspect that he and Kelsey were managing a small army of sock puppets at that time, so I'm not sure. That makes it really difficult to assess, how much like genuine support he had, because of, like I said, just taking our experience in Cool Cats and approximating that out. That's just my strong suspicion. But anyway, this wasn't the only example. I don't want to just like excoriate Colby, but yeah, I do think that it's a pattern that we see in both his distant allegations and claims, as well as his more recent claims. That's the main point I'm trying to make. Okay. Also, in one of his interviews, this was in the notes, so I do know who the interviewer was, but I don't want to disclose it. The interviewer told the owner of these notes that at one point in their interview with Colby, they looked up and caught an expression that was, quote, out of character for Colby, like, I'm going to get him now. So it said him now, but I, put in square brackets. He was referring to Joe. Like I said, there are a few moderators in addition to Janice, who has the whole document, who have seen this and can verify that this was a person who was involved in the investigation. I just feel cautious since this person is being quoted, that I just don't, want to bring unwelcome focus on that person. This person reportedly described this interaction as, quote, an odd, out of place look. So that does point to potential retaliation. And I have talked about, I did see in the 2006 vacation, I'm not going to go into that. I have a whole live just all about Joe, where I'm very transparent about the issues that I witnessed with Joe. And so when Colby talks about like Joe being annoyed with him as a little kid, I can say I do believe that is very honest. I did witness that. And others such as the nanny also testified to that. She said that she would be in the house with Joe, and that Joe was much stricter with Colby than he was with Tylee. She never witnessed anything inappropriate or even like blowing up at Tylee, but did with Colby. She said she never witnessed any physical abuse. I've talked about excuse me, I didn't witness it. I only heard it, but it's not what it still isn't considered abuse according to Texas law, but in my opinion, it was abuse. But also to take the focus off of allegations made against him. I already talked about this, that they noted that the outcry could be to avoid trouble. Oh yeah, this is where I included the notes, excuse me. And that Colby was accused of texting one of his stepbrothers a picture of Tylee that was described as provocative. The screenshot of the text and the pic were provided to CPS. She was 3 at the time, so I don't know what you could do. I'm not even going to go there. That is all the detail that was provided. He was also accused of inappropriate behavior toward both stepbrothers. A judge mandated cameras be installed in the home when they were in Lori and Charles' home. And I already talked about this. And Joe also alleged that Tylee told him Colby pushed her head into a wall, which left a mark. Okay, so those are possible motives for when he was younger. However, obviously, he was an adult when he echoed these allegations. And so, it just begs the question, okay, why as an adult? Like, because this is one of the questions that people have asked, like, especially because it's rare for males to make an outcry. People have postulated like this would have been humiliating for him. So there would be, since it's already harder for males to make an outcry, which I'm not sure that that's true, but maybe that is true. That, he would have nothing to gain from making these allegations. And that is a fair question. But here are my theories. Trying to be fair, like I said. I mean, I have gone back and forth. Not that that means that I'm not going to overstep a line. There are going to be people who think I went too far. There are going to be people who think I didn't go far enough. Why didn't she include the screenshots? Why didn't she share more details? Why is she holding back? Why does she have any concern for Colby's well-being, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, there are going to be people on all sides, but at the end of the day, I have to live with my own conscience. So I do feel like one of the compelling theories is that he monetized pity. And so the more pity that people had experienced for him, that resulted ostensibly in more followers for their YouTube channel and potentially more money. So let's talk a little bit about the history here. So on January, I believe it was January 31st, Kelsey's mother published a GoFundMe to raise. Initially, they were asking for $15,000. You can see the page. It will probably be shut down pretty soon, but it's at bit.ly/CR for Colby Ryan -GFM for GoFundMe, obviously. So yes, so the GoFundMe started at $15,000 on January 31st. 2020, and included this detail. I mean, there were the details are still up there, so you can read it. But I did think it was interesting that, excuse me, she noted these kids have lost their cars, and in parentheses, one was taken by the police for evidence, and the other was in Lori's and Charles' name, and the payments had not been made for months. So, this might be a little nitpicky, but I don't think it is. And like, they weren't his car. Like, these cars weren't his and Kelsey's cars to begin with. Now, since the FOIA docs came out, now we know the truck was Charles, and Colby and Lori had gone and gotten that on July 15th, just 4 days after Charles was murdered. They filled it up with Charles' belongings. And that wasn't Colby's, but Colby was driving it. And these are in my timeline, but Kay had people running reconnaissance, and someone found Charles' truck in Colby's driveway. She sent a picture of the truck to Detective Moffat. Excuse me, it was the parking lot of Colby and Kelsey's apartment complex, not a driveway. And so that was the truck. And the other car was Lori's. And then that's the Rogue. That's the Rogue that Colby had cleaned and had blood evidence even after Colby had the car cleaned. So these weren't cars that he was entitled to. And also, he had already told investigators that if his mom contacted him, that he would let them know. This was before the welfare check. He said that this was mid-November that Lori told him that she would be giving him her car. And so when they came for the welfare check to see if he had Tylee and or JJ, Colby didn't disclose that, well, I mean, she is planning on giving me her car. Because obviously the ethical and moral thing would have been to disclose that to investigators and immediately turn it over for processing of the evidence. And Colby didn't do that. So I just thought it was interesting. I mean, it could be that Kelsey's mom was, fed a story that wasn't accurate, but also this detail isn't in there now, so I don't know if she edited it or if this was like in a follow-up comment, but I'm sure other people saw it too, that initially she had said that, Colby was doing all these interviews and law enforcement wasn't paying him to do them. Because I remember there being quite a bit of clapback about that. Like, well, obviously law enforcement isn't going to pay him to do interviews. And then when the FOIA docs came out, it was quite clear he didn't do all these interviews. I mean, one of the interviews was only because it was the day after the case went public, and he freaked out and had to come clean that he had been driving his mom's car. So that's when they collected, his and Kelsey and their daughter's DNA, and they had a brief interview, at least according to the notes. We don't have any of the audio of Colby's interviews, only their very succinct summaries. Excuse me. So he wasn't, there's no evidence that Colby was doing like many interviews. So, okay. But he also claimed that like he couldn't work, or he lost his job because of it, and then he couldn't work because of, all the paparazzi and stuff like that. After it had only raised $275 in 6 days and stirred up a lot of controversy in the true crime community, it dropped to $10,000. So this was February 6th. This was on a Thursday. You can see here it was Thursday. And this, I think, was the date of like the most recent goal amount. And I captured this on a Saturday, which was February 8th. But okay, but you can see there was only $275 raised. So I think that, they figured out, okay, we're asking too much. So they dropped it to $10,000 and then dropped it again that same day to $7,500. So you can see here, $275. So, it stands to reason that's the same day. This is also February 8th, and this is noting, I believe, the day and the time for I wish I could more easily tell what this coordinates with, but I have in my notes at the time, because I was following this very closely, that it was February 6th. It dropped twice in one day. And I think that stands to reason. I mean, the amount was still the same. I captured this on the same day. Okay. All right. Then after the kids remained, so, it went from 15,000 to 10,000 to 7,500 on the same day. Then after the kids' remains were found, it shot up to 20,000. And then it closed at 19.7 thousand. Colby and Kelsey were also dropping their Linktree links everywhere. So I have a Linktree account. In fact, I have a Linktree with just like all the like hotspots in New York City, like best restaurants, best food carts, best coffee places, best places with a view of the city. I mean, like best thrift stores, I have this gravitational pull toward researching. And so I would watch like, all of these like YouTube videos, and if I found like a really interesting restaurant, I would even like reference that, like particular minute mark in the video and say like, oh, this dude, said at this place to make sure you get the, whatever or whatever, and like specific dishes and stuff. So I just kind of, that's just kind of my shtick. And so I have 2 different Linktree accounts. And the reason I mention that is Linktree enables you to compile, a bunch of links in one place. So you just share a link to your Linktree, and then people can easily, like click through, in my case, to like different places in New York City. And if anyone is interested, I can share a link to my Linktree in the event you come to the city. I mean, it's pretty cool, especially like the best places to see like fantastic views of like the city line and stuff like that. They're a collection of like my own experience, and also like wedding photographers. They would have like blog posts about like the best places, that because I was thinking like, who would know where the best places are to get like these kind of iconic, cityscape views of New York City, wedding photographers. And that panned out. these different wedding photographers listed places. So if anyone's interested, I can, and if someone reminds me, I can throw that out in the community tab. But anyway, but my point here is you can see that Colby at the top of his link tree was a link to his PayPal and his Venmo, and then everything else. And for Kelsey, at the top of her link tree was a link to their baby registry. So, you know, why would they have a link to their baby registry? If you haven't been following the case, or if you weren't aware of this, Colby and Kelsey found out that they were expecting when they were living in Idaho. And so they noted in one of their lives that, I mean, they had already talked about how, like, Colby wanted to have a big family. So they wanted more kids, but they noted in one of their lives that they had gotten rid of all their baby stuff. So, you know, already I'm kind of like, okay, maybe they just didn't want the expense of moving it all, you know, to Idaho. But, you know, why would you get rid of all of your baby stuff if you know you want to have more kids? So what they decided to do was have this online baby shower. And so to that end, Kelsey registered with baby list and had 248 items. At one point, I went through, I didn't count all of the items. I used code to count them. It's called scraping, web scraping. And so I was able to use code to count all of the items, to include items that had already been purchased, as well as items that were still left to be purchased. So, I mean, this was the equivalent of thousands of dollars. Anyway, so, and one of the items on the list that was listed, so they had different categories, and one of the categories, I think it might here, yeah, like you could filter by like price, by stores, and they had a category of must-have. And one of the things in their must-have category was a doula fund. And they were asking for just under $4,000 for that. Okay, but even after the shower, so they did the shower and recorded it. That video has since been taken down. But even after the shower, I had either I had grabbed this or someone else had grabbed it. I think I grabbed it. But they were still kind of circling back and letting people know that there were still more must-haves. So let's listen to that.
And we've been doing so much stuff to get ready, and then that's how we really went again and saw how much stuff we have for her, and that all is due to you, beautiful YouTube family. You have no idea. I said this earlier in this video, but thank you guys so much for everything that you've done and sent in, because we have everything we need for our daughter besides like literally 3 things.
Yeah, no, we only have a few things left on our registry.
Yeah.
A few things left on our registry that are like must-haves.
Yes.
So, we're
Guys,
excited, guys.
we have everything to be looking forward to. We cannot wait to share with you this last couple weeks of pregnancy. I never thought we'd be doing videos like this, but it is interesting. It is our lives, and we are excited to have our baby. So, and we're just
Okay, and then in one of the lives, again, I don't want to be cruel or unfair, but they even hinted at like getting a car. So they had at least one live where they were walking to, it was like some kind of like arcade or something like that. And I believe this live, they did a lot of lives. This live was after that.
been kind of the main thing we've been doing.
An AZ meetup.
We love to do an AZ meetup.
by the way, they're saying AZ meetup. So they were back in Arizona at this time. So I'm going to play it again.
Been kind of the main thing we've been doing.
An AZ meetup.
We'd love to do an AZ meetup. If we had a car, we'd be driving around on AZ.
Yeah.
Been kind of the main thing we've been.
Okay, so again, I just think in their case, you know, like if Colby had just kind of kept a low pro, even with making the allegations, I think there would have been a little less scrutiny. But I think that, you know, and this wasn't just me, obviously. You know, a lot of people who were really following the case closely early on took issue with, you know, kind of this ongoing, it was almost like a marketing campaign to, you know, constantly generate income from this case, you know, through monetizing their YouTube channel and, you know, promoting their Venmo and their PayPal and their baby registry and all of these things on, I would say, a very regular basis. But I suspect, moving on, I suspect, and I talked about this in the last live. Again, I try not to operate under the assumption that someone watching tonight's live has watched any other lives. But I also suspect that, much like Summer, some of the motivation would be to placate his mom. They all know that's an easy win. By making an allegation against Joe, whatever else that they've said that may anger her is going to be possibly met with less ire by throwing this out there. And yeah, and there were other details, like even when he started his YouTube channel, like his first 3 videos were just about like just casual stuff, like about his figurine collection. He did a review of a movie and he talked about Star Wars, and it was all, you know, it was just very lighthearted, like, hey, you can follow your boy, you know, CJ and stuff. And at one point, you know, I had made the comment, this was in a private Facebook group. I hadn't gone public with anything, including my timeline. I wanted to, I wasn't taking interviews and stuff. But I had said, because I was just so frustrated. I mean, when he finally addressed the case at all, and he started the YouTube channel on December 19th, the case went public the next day. So, you know, he's just talking about like these, you know, lighthearted things. And so, you know, I found his YouTube channel in December when I found out that the kids were missing, and was just like, what is going on? And then when he finally addressed the case at all, he said something to the effect of, you know, there's a lot of negativity, but I'm just going to focus on the positives. And that really rubbed me the wrong way, because I was already just so mystified by why wasn't there ever like a joint press conference? Like usually when kids go missing, because I had followed true crime for like 20 years leading up to this case. Now I don't, but but you know, so but usually there's like a joint press conference with law enforcement and the family. Then they make an appeal, a public appeal to the parent who's gone dark, who, you know, who has disappeared, and you know, and appealing for them to return the children safely. And so I was really just so confused that I couldn't find any of that. Like eventually the Woodcocks did a press conference. That was later in January. This was in late December. I was like, why doesn't this exist? And so the only videos I could find were Colby's, and then I was mystified. Like, why is he talking about just really trivial things. And why is it so lighthearted? And then when he finally addressed the fact that the kids were missing, the fact that he was like almost like grasping for some higher moral ground. Like everyone is like all worked up and there's a lot of negativity, but I'm going to focus on the positive. And that's what he did in that video. And so this was in a private Facebook group, but I wrote a post. Anyone who was in that group may know what I'm talking about. That group had also been like it was archived several times. I always forget the name of the group. Always, I just cannot remember the name of the group. I think I put it in my notes somewhere. But but anyway, so I had made the point that it looked like he was playing the fiddle while Rome burned, and and my appeal was, why won't you address your mother directly? Like, you are probably the only person who has any chance of, getting anywhere with a public appeal. And I had texted her, but the text went through green. So that phone had been turned off pretty quickly. But anyway, so then he posted then the next day an appeal to his mom, and but then he set that video to private pretty soon thereafter. I don't remember the timing, but it was before all of his other videos, long before all of his other videos started going missing. So it just seemed at that time, for those of us who were following the case, like maybe he had some communication with her mom, with his mom, and his mom was like, absolutely not, take it down. We don't know, but he set it to private for some reason. Okay, and I already talked about this last week. This I'm not going to play again because I did play it. I just included it in the presentation. I will make the presentation available at the end. I always provide a link, but I talked about in the last presentation that it appears all of Tylee's money between September and December had gone to Colby, and it was just under $6,000, and that was just the money from Tylee. That didn't include money from Lori, which was being sent to him via her Cash App. 3, I talked about this a little bit in the last live, but I think with the entire Cox family, so this isn't just Colby, I think as long as they convince the public that Joe was this, PEDO, that even if it came out later that he was murdered, and I do suspect that the family is concerned about that. I talked about that quite a bit in my live about Summer. I do believe that is part of the motivation for her echoing Lori's tired accusations about Joe. I do wonder if, because if you think about how careless and reckless these family members were and what they put in writing, Lori included, Chad included, they were putting so much in writing while actively murdering people. And so if Joe was murdered, and I do believe that he was, and I already made this point in the last live, but Lori takes off for Hawaii after Joe is found, which is a solid pattern, not just for her, but the rest of the family. If the claim about the family being in Hawaii when Stacy died, if that claim is accurate, again, speaks to a pattern. But even with taking off, so it's safe to assume she took off because she was afraid and she didn't want to be available. Excuse me, to be interviewed. But even when she was in Hawaii, according to one of the friends, she bragged to two different friends. One was April Raymond, and I forget who the other friend was. According to Anne Eliason, that Lori paid Alex to murder Joe. So if she's being that reckless in this trip to Hawaii, I'm sure not only does the whole family know what happened to Joe, especially those living with her and Charles, which included Colby, Kelsey, and Zach Cox. I suspect there's probably a very delicate balance, because just from the sources I do have, I mean, there is a significant infighting, disagreements. I shouldn't say significant infighting. I don't know that there are, still clashes. There are, people have kind of lined up, according to different sources, that family members have lined up on different sides of different lines. So it's really fractured the family. But I do suspect that part of all of their motivation is, in the event that Phoenix police ever investigates Joe's death, or if, like I talked about in the last slide, someone decides to sell their story to, to a book publisher or something like that, and just like burns the whole thing to the ground. And that person could also be, Lori, or she could kind of like trigger the forest fire, because I would imagine she's quite upset with family members and their lack of loyalty, that no one would care. And I think that attitude was demonstrated by Janice in her description of Alex's assault on Joe. It's a very short clip.
Janice, Alex was your son, and he has been described as the family hitman.
I can't help but laugh. Alex is the most laid back person. He's been funny his whole life. He was very protective of Colby and Tylee. Very protective. He said, I tasered a pedophile. And so he said, I'm willing to admit it.
Yeah. So that was her very glib explanation. And also, what does him being funny have anything to do with anything? And that's also a solid Cox family tradition. They just start tossing word salad just to, I don't know, dilute the impact of whatever they say.
Janice.
Okay, and Colby said something in his Netflix interview. Again, I mean, some of these statements, they can just, kind of roll off like water off a duck's back for a lot of people. But for me, I was just like, this is a really compelling statement. And I'm just going to play it.
My mom told us all the time, in front of us, or was talking to someone else, that she did want Joe dead.
Whoops, sorry. Okay.
And
okay, I'll play it
my mom
again.
told us all the time, in front of us, or was talking to someone else, that she did want Joe dead.
So what he said there was that my mom told us all the time, in front of us, and when she was talking to other people, that she did want Joe dead. And then it's also part of the reason why I've said, in reference to Adam and Rex's claims, that now they're like, I don't know, there could be, some substance to Annie's, question of if Joe was murdered. I don't think that they're just entertaining. And I want to be fair, but I just don't think that this is a case of them like, you know what? Well, maybe she's onto something. Maybe there is a little bit of truth. No, I appreciate their support. I've appreciated Rex's kind words, but I just don't find that believable. As well as Rex's statement, according to someone, that he was very close with Alex back in 2007, but that he said something to the effect that Alex the aim in tasering Joe wasn't to kill him. It was just to taser him. So you couldn't have been close to Alex and not know that, no, the intent was for Alex to murder him. And both Adam and Colby referenced the plan, which was to taser him, throw him in a trunk. At that point, Colby caught himself. This was in the Netflix documentary. If someone reminds me, I'll throw it out on the community tab, though I may have already thrown it out before. But Adam went all in his interview with Detective Moffat, saying the plan was to taser him, throw him in the trunk. So Colby stopped at that point because I think he was like, uh-oh, I shouldn't be talking about this. But Adam said, and then Alex was going to take him out to the desert, shoot him, and bury him. So they all, I just do not believe that anyone could have been close to Alex and not know that the intent was to murder Joe. Because if you think about it, even when Alex was in prison, so he wasn't in prison, he was in jail. Even when he was in jail, excuse me, I'm really losing my voice. Even when he was in jail, I mean, you would think he's going to be on his best behavior because now, he's in jail for tasering Joe. Nope, he was trying to get someone to do a hit on Joe because he reached out to his friend to ask her to get Joe's license plate number. So obviously he was like, okay, well, I can't finish the job given my circumstances, but you know what? There are some guys in here who are willing to finish the job. So in conclusion, I don't think that Colby ruined Lori's life. I personally think she ruined his. And again, I don't want to be unfair in including, this news story, but circling back to the incidents that I shared early on, what you see a pattern of is Lori a really solid pattern of her just justifying, anything that he wanted. She was like, almost like they were each other's wingman, so to speak. And so anyway, I'm going to take it off of this. Let me just share the last slide with a link, and then I'll wrap up. No, okay. No, that's a summary. I will. I guess what I want to say with regard to this is she ruined his life on many levels. I don't think that Colby is without hope. I definitely don't think that. I definitely believe that if he just gets help, like from a qualified therapist, and mentorship from a man he can trust, maybe someone who shares his religious beliefs but is a little more balanced and a little more tethered. I really think that Colby can pull out of this and pull together a really nice life for himself and his girls. But I do believe that Lori, on many levels, ruined Colby's life by, one, pressuring him to make an outcry against Joe. And I do believe that she pressured him to do that. I mean, it appears to have been self-serving, but clearly there wasn't a compass in his life that pointed to north. By pressuring him to pressure Tylee, it definitely looks like Colby was getting, because he was a child. And even though he participated, and he almost completely ruined Joe's life. Like, there was a note at one point in the notes that I have where this person said that one of the detectives had said, we just need to go and pick him up, in reference to Joe. Like they were ready to just, you know what, we've heard enough. We need to go and pick him up. But anyway, so by not teaching him the sanctity of human life, we see that, again and again. And I don't want to get like too much on a soapbox or anything like that, but these are the things that caused me to have a really significant compassion for Colby. I don't think that our past is deterministic. Like I really despise statements like, oh, of course he's as messed up as he is. Like he wouldn't have had any other choice. Clearly there are a lot of people who overcome really traumatic or dysfunctional childhoods, but also she ruined his life by demonstrating dishonesty again and again, and we see that pattern with Colby. I do believe that Colby's faith is sincere. I know not everyone believes that. I do believe that he has a very sincere faith, and just professing to be a Christian doesn't mean that he's going to be perfect. I believe that there is a level of sincerity, and on a personal level, I really enjoyed watching his lives, because I had seen him at, when he was like in this like really kind of, emo phase. Like he was kind of an angry kid, like, in those two later vacations. He was very sweet in the first one, but the last two, he was just much more angry, like kind of sulky and stuff, and all kids go through phases. But so it was really delightful for me to see him as like this kind of positive, like can do kind of guy. But we do see this pattern of dishonesty. And I think she also destroyed his life by pitting him against Joe and then later against Charles. It was like basically whoever she had an issue with, she was, as Vivian would call it, a Confederate. It was like she had to have his buy-in, but also by getting his hands dirty and raiding Charles' home and stealing from his sons, and then stealing from Tylee. And if you even think about the timing of their trip to Houston, I don't want to get too much on a tangent, but this is probably going to be the last live, maybe one more live before I finish school. I'm finished in December, and I just like these last couple months, I just really have to focus on school. I might do a live on Audrey, because that would be pretty quick and easy, and I do think it needs to be done. Because I think she's largely really just kind of skated, and I think the media just kind of takes any kind of claim and just treats it like a fact. But anyway, okay, so but going back to his trip with Lori to Charles' home, where I've already talked about it. They took his truck, they filled it up with Charles' belongings, like his nicer belongings. There was an iMac, there were other electronic devices, according to one of Charles' sons. He had a really nice watch collection, and that was gone. And Lori just sent him like some cheap Timex watches that you can get from like a drugstore and stuff. So sounds like they pretty much just raided the home of all of the valuables. But what's interesting is especially when you look at this from a timeline perspective, the 15th was also the day that Lori found out she was no longer the beneficiary of Charles' life insurance policy. So, so it looks like she finds out that she's not the beneficiary. I'm sure, I would imagine she also told Colby. That meant he also wasn't going to get anything. So they weren't going to get what they wanted, what they, apparently felt entitled to. So what did they do? They just went and took it. They didn't need consent. And, and it also just begs the question, like, how did they even know that Cole, Zach, Kay, Larry, and Cheryl were all in Arizona. So, like, would Colby and Lori shown up at Charles with the plan of like clearing out the house if they thought that there was any chance that Charles' family could be in the home? I would say no. I do not think they would have done that. So something emboldened them to feel, entitled to this stuff. And on the same day, the 15th, one of Charles' sons had noted that he wasn't getting a call back from Colby, and Colby wasn't returning his text. So on the 15th, Lori still hadn't even told Charles' sons that Charles had been shot. Now they did find out from Cheryl, but Cole was still pushing Lori, trying to get her to tell them, and she wouldn't tell them. So I mean, when you look at this in the context of all that was going on at that time, you see Lori is setting this example of, well, I didn't get what I wanted, what I feel entitled to, which was $1 million. So we're going to go to Charles' house, and legally she was still married to him. But clearly, I mean, from an integrity standpoint, they couldn't have possibly felt that, yes, as the stepson who hadn't even talked to Charles since February, and Charles didn't even ever meet his granddaughter, that Charles would want them to have these belongings. He would have wanted his sons to have them. But anyway, so they didn't get what they wanted, what they felt entitled to, so they just went and took it. That is the pattern. Like, going back from when Colby was younger, like Lori advocating for him for like the foot massage, and telling me that she told Colby that no, he would be able to marry my daughter because technically they weren't biologically related. But anyway, but also I think she ruined his life, or at least made it incredibly difficult by fostering a dependence on her that crippled him. I mean, we see that as a solid pattern, even just in the history of the Vivan Lewis. And we don't even know just how much money Lori had been sending him. So, and then, Colby helped to destroy Joe's life. But, like, again, I don't want to be unfair, but it seemed like even that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to, destroy this man financially, emotionally, in so many ways, psychologically, destroy his relationship with Tylee. Because think about, like, Colby's claim. Like, we all knew that my mom wanted Joe dead. She talked about it, in front of us, and she talked about it to others. Well, think about from Tylee's point of view, the message that sent her. Well, if Lori wanted Joe dead, what would, I mean, obviously, like, having any loyalty to Joe would potentially put her in harm's way. So I think that even calls into question some of the statements that, like, people who knew Tylee when she was older, some of the issues she had with Joe. And I'm not saying that there weren't issues with Joe. I'm sure there were issues with Joe. But I do suspect that it was confounded by the fact that she's hearing this family, they constantly circle the wagons. She knew that they wanted him dead. So anyway, okay, so in summary, a few points. I'll go through them one by one, and I do want to do this with some of the longer lives because we're covering a lot of ground. 1, my family witnessed some of Colby's inappropriate behavior. 2, Colby's outcry followed on the heels of Lori and Charles' marriage. 3, Lori, Charles, and Colby all pressured Tylee to make an outcry. We know that from Tylee. 4, Colby made his outcry following reports against him, from what I can tell. 5, Colby's outcry included claims that were physically impossible or couldn't be proved. 6, no one believed his claims according to these notes, and a grand jury no-billed the case. 7, a few months later, Tylee made an outcry but caved under the scrutiny. 8, Lori continued to refer to Charles as Tylee's daddy even after being admonished not to do that. 9, Colby thought he owned the narrative when he did his interviews, this is as an adult, and was profiting from the pity his outcries helped generate. 10, I also suspect Colby, Summer, Janice, and Melanie Pulaski have all offered up their claims as a peace offering to Lori. 11, I think that the whole family knows that Lori had Joe killed. Okay, so this presentation can be found at bit.ly/CR for Colby Ryan -allegations. All right, so I'll spend a few minutes. This was a very long live. I'll spend a few minutes doing Q&A. I'm pretty spent, but yeah, as always. Oh, let me go back on camera. Oh my gosh, my funky hair. There's no curling it. You should see it first thing in the morning. I wake up every morning with a white girl fro. Okay, so, oh, Teresa Mack. Yeah, I'm glad you made it too. I recognized your name from Facebook. But if anyone has a question, please just put the word question in all caps. You don't have to put the question in all caps. Also, if you ask a question early on, I will not see it. So maybe just ask it again. I'm probably going to spend about 10-15 minutes asking questions, and then I'm going to bounce. Thanks, Ravina. Yeah, I do like Pixies. I will feel more comfortable when it just chills out. I mean, it's just so difficult to, I mean, this is with so much product. Anyway, okay, I need to stop talking about my hair. Teresa, that's a good question. Teresa asked, didn't someone say that Lori treated Colby like a boyfriend? Yes, but I will push back on that a little bit. It's the only statement that I can think of that I thought, I think that's maybe a little bit unfair to Lori. There is definitely that dynamic. My only point is that I think it was symbiotic. And the reason I said, in other words, she was treating him like a boyfriend, but I think in some ways, Colby was also treating Lori like a girlfriend. I just think that they had a closeness. I'm not suggesting anything of an insidious nature. I'm just saying that, like, here's an example. So when I flew out there in 2018, I'm sure the whole family is like, why did Lori fly her out? You know, why did we have anything to do with this woman? We should have known she's at least a 4.5 level D. But when I was out there in 2018, that was in May, because that's when I found out that Joe was dead and not from Lori. But Lori had told me that Colby and Kelsey had just moved in. So, I mean, had just moved out. So they got married, I think in mid-January, like maybe January 11th, I think. I think he referenced his anniversary in one of his lives. But it was sometime in January, I'm pretty sure. So that was 2018. I flew out in May, and Lori made it sound like it was right before I flew out, because she said that they were in the bedroom that I was staying in. And so, you know, Colby has been open about, you know, like saving himself for marriage in his relationship with Kelsey. So, you know, so like you take that into account, and it's like, okay, you're saving yourself for marriage, and then you get married, but then you move your new wife in with your mom and stepfather, and it was a big house, but it wasn't that big, like the room I was in. So, all right, let me back up. Lori and Charles were in one hallway, so they were on one side of the house, and then all the other bedrooms. So the bedroom I was staying in, Tylee's, which was next to that room, and then Zach was in that same hall, and then there was I think there might have been two bathrooms, but anyway, so we were all in one hall, and then Lori and Charles were in on the other side of the house. So so that is, I mean, I understand, like, they were in financial duress, but maybe just hold off on marriage, but the fact that Colby moved his, new wife in with his mom and stepdad, and I know Lori talked about, like, that there was friction between her and Kelsey, and you could see that even when I was there. But so, and then even, and again, I don't want to be unfair, but I knew that history, so I was already just kind of like, I mean, it seemed like Colby and maybe Kelsey was okay with it because it was like living on, like at a, I don't know, like a resort, I mean, it was a really big home. It had a nice pool. So they were definitely able to enjoy a lifestyle that Colby and Kelsey wouldn't have been able to provide. And then uh, they found out Kelsey was expecting while I was there. But so yeah, so and then there was one time when Colby was being interviewed about seeing his mom in the court hearing, where she had been extradited to Idaho to face these charges. At that point, it was like abandonment and stuff. But Chad was in the courthouse because he hadn't been arrested yet. This was, I think, like around February 20th or something like that, in 2020. And Colby had said in an interview, like, he just seemed angry that she looked back, was like looking for Chad. And he was like, why is she looking at him for support? And so I can understand his concern. He's like, we hardly even know who this guy is. Although Lori did tell him when they were in the home in Houston, that she was getting remarried right away, because he told investigators that. So he later claimed, like, he had no idea she was getting married. But between her telling him that, and he said he was really angry that it was too early to introduce a new father for Tylee and JJ. But between that and knowing that Charles had forwarded the email from Chad Daybell, where he had rated all of the family members. I'm sure the whole family was talking about who's Chad, so Kelsey and Colby claimed that they just didn't look at any of these emails at this point, but this was before even the blow up fight. No, I think Charles sent him that email right after the blow up fight. I think it was like February 6th, and the blow up fight was like January 30th, I think. But Charles, according to Kay, was still paying their rent, their groceries, their car payment. In fact, Charles didn't stop paying his and Tylee's car payments until like June. He referenced in a text to Adam that he had told Lori that they would have to pay, that Colby would have to pay for his own car payment and insurance. And if he couldn't do that, he couldn't have the car, because he said, now everyone's going to say, I'm taking Colby. It's my fault. Colby doesn't have a car. Something to that effect. But but anyway, so it just doesn't stand to reason that they would just like not read any of his emails, because they would have to be concerned that he could cut them off financially. So, and it was a very short email, so it's not like it was a long rambling email. But anyway, so I strongly suspect these family members, they knew who Chad was. Summer had met him. Uh, it sounds like someone was with Summer at that conference that Lori took them to, and that was very early on in this. And she introduced them to Chad. So yeah, yeah. Anyway, so I think that there has been a symbiotic relationship, because even Kelsey had said in the Netflix documentary that, and it was kind of like this dramatic moment. It was after Charles was murdered. She said that she told Colby, "I don't want anything to do with anyone in your family." And I think she was trying to establish, that's why we didn't reach out to Tylee, or why I didn't reach out to Tylee, because I just didn't want anything to do with anyone in their family. But then, you see this whole history, and we already knew that there were significant Venmos. So it was like, well, that kind of has a hollow ring to it, because you're basically saying, I don't want anything to do with anyone in this family unless they're sending us money, So anyway, so all that to say, yes, I do think that Lori was obsessed with Colby. I've talked before about, even from, I think this was the first time I was with them. It was either the first time or the second time. But she said to me, as a mother, like, is he not the most beautiful child you've ever seen? And I just thought that was really unusual, like, to ask another mother, like, isn't my child the most beautiful child you've ever seen? So, and Nate had said that she had mouthed, when Colby came up to testify, "That's my baby," so, or "my baby boy," something like that. So clearly, like, he was the golden child. You can see where Tylee would not have been as accepted, because here she was at 3 and 4 saying, yeah, Colby and Charles pressured me to make this claim. I mean, she was just being who she was. She was so young. But from the beginning, clearly Colby was the much more compliant of the two. So, and was definitely her favorite. Oh, and Colby, as I'm looking for a question, he even told a story once in one of his lives, and it didn't land well. I remember that from just being in a Facebook group. But he was trying to talk about Tylee, and he wanted to share some positive things about Tylee, which I appreciated, because he really has largely been pretty silent on, like, sharing positive things about Tylee. There will just be mostly kind of skim the surface things, like, oh, she was so sweet, she had a beautiful voice, she was very protective of JJ, stuff like that, but very safe things. I mean, really, in my opinion, Summer was the first, and I already addressed all the issues with with Summer, but she was the first one from the Cox family to share, like, significant details of who was Tylee. I had so little interaction with her, but I had enough to at least see that some of these, like, allegations that people were making against her, they just didn't align with what I saw. But but anyway, so I forget what I was going to say. I was going somewhere with that. Oh, but he was telling this story about, and he was, like, talking about how selfless Tylee was, and he mentioned this one, I think it was it was Christmas, and he said that Tylee gave up, like, had like her right to a Christmas present so that he could have another pair of Air Jordans. So, I mean, to be fair, he was saying, he was like being self-effacing, which is pretty, in my opinion, rare for Colby, but it showed just how like he wasn't aware of just how egregious that was. And I also, knowing what I know of Tylee, I just don't believe that Tylee would be like, here, I don't need anything for Christmas. You go ahead and have another pair of Air Jordans. Like, I mean, she was a very strong little girl, and definitely not a wilting flower. So yeah, so maybe, but also, that speaks to like what is up with this family that they would even allow something like that. And it's very strange. Okay, looking for any other questions. Lou Holt asked, is Colby divorced? I don't know. Someone called me little little Annie Red Riding Hood. Thanks, Robin. Originally, the police only knew about JJ's disappearance. Did Colby notify them that Tylee was also missing? Yes, he did. They came to his home because Brandon had tipped him off that Tylee could be with him. Now, keep in mind, all of these family members at that point, they identified Tylee as one of the perpetrators. So they did not see her as missing. Now, after the fact, they have said, that they were looking for Tylee and JJ, and I've talked about this, but Rich Robertson, the PI, in a really strange statement to Chris Cuomo when he was interviewed, he went so far as to say, they knew the kids were missing, but at the point that he got involved, nobody was all that concerned at that point. And so I'm just like, in what universe do adults say, like, we know that the kids are missing, but we're just not that concerned at this point? But yes, so Tylee wasn't included in the welfare check. So Brandon gave Gilbert police this tip that she could be with Colby, and that's why the next day they went to Colby and Kelsey's, and Tylee wasn't there. And again, I don't want to be unfair, but even when Colby talked to Justin about it, he said that, they came and they were asking about Tylee, and he was like, no, I don't know where Tylee is. Like, why would they be asking me about Tylee? And he said, I was just worried about what they were going to say next. So it was just kind of a weird a weird reaction, again, with Colby, it's kind of more a sum totality of his affect, some of his statements, some of his, kind of his sketch behavior. I just don't think that he ever thought any of these details would come out, or that people would kind of hold his feet to the flames with some of, his statements compared to other statements. But yeah, so but it was also odd, very odd, that the Gilbert police came to their home 5 days later. There's no record that they reached back out to Gilbert police. 5 days later, and this is in my timeline, if you're so inclined. So this would have been like around the end of November. Kelsey sent an email to Chandler police because they didn't know like which department had come to the door. So, but she just like filled out their web form, like that's on their website, saying, hey, some police officers came to the house. If someone reminds me, like one of my mods or in a comment, I'll drop the link out there, because it was just, again, in my opinion, it was very strange. Here you just find out Tylee, and now JJ was missing. Now Tylee is unaccounted for. Law enforcement still didn't treat her as a victim. They still treated her as a perpetrator. But then for 5 days, there's just kind of what appears to be radio silence. And it's quite obvious that they weren't in communication with Gilbert police, because she wouldn't have filled out the web form for Chandler police, but she fills out this web form saying, what's the deal? And so it's just so strange. And, and I also shared in another live, like the next day was Thanksgiving, the next day after police came to their home. And there's, again, I want to be fair, but there's just there's no outcry to the public. Like, my siblings are missing, there's no sign that they're worried. And Kelsey had a very positive post, or all these like happy pictures of them with Kelsey's family and what looked to be friends. And so it's like this, family kind of friends Thanksgiving, and there just was nothing that indicated that they received absolutely devastating, shocking news the day before. So anyway, it's just, there are so many strange details. Oh, Nair Fame asked, did Joe pay child support? I am just wondering about motive. Was it that he just refused to give up on Tylee? So there were issues with Joe getting behind on child support. I did see that. I saw that before in the FOIA docs, and then again and this week. But Lori was trying to say, or Lori's attorney, who was ruthless, in my opinion, he was ruthless to me. And but he tried to say, like, no visitation until he's caught up on child support. And Lori was saying he needs to be put in jail. I think it was like a month for every month he's behind, or maybe it was like a year for every month he's behind. Like, she kind of laid out, like, here's how long he should be in jail because he's behind on child support. So I do suspect that he may have stopped paying child support when Tylee told him she didn't want to see him anymore. I forget what year that was. That came up in the FOIA docs, or no, that was a friend's, one of her friend's mom told me that. She gave me like the timeline for, like, she was living in Hawaii, because she was living with Joe when Lori and Charles moved to Hawaii with JJ. Found that out from Ann Eliason's interview. That was news to me. And so, like, Joe finally won custody, and then Charles and Lori moved to Hawaii with JJ, abandoning Tylee, and so then Tylee wanted to move to Hawaii. She had this new baby brother, and and her mom. And anyway, so Joe didn't have a fighting chance. But then, according to a friend's mom, when she got back to Hawaii, after visiting Joe, one of the visitations, she said that Tylee had the talk with him where she told him that she didn't want to see him anymore. And then it was really sad, because, like, I was going all through Joe's Facebook, and I saw it was a reply he made to someone's comment on one of his public posts, that it's something about how he was moving to Austin, because he always loved Austin. He didn't like Arizona. And so you can tell the moment that he kind of gave up on, um, having a relationship with Tylee. Because I think at that point he was like, well, they're in Hawaii. Why should I stay in Arizona when I love Austin? And my daughter has said she doesn't want to see me anymore. So, who knows? He may have decided that he wasn't going to pay child support. I don't know. There's no record of that. But I do know that in Arizona, if a parent gets behind on child support, then there's like some law that they have to have an insurance policy in the other parent's name, because lots of people, and I remember early on Kay telling Detective Moffat that Tylee was the sole beneficiary of Joe's life insurance policy. And that wasn't true. Not only was she not the sole beneficiary, she wasn't listed as a beneficiary at all. And I knew that because I found out pretty far into this case from someone who was working the case that I was listed as a beneficiary, a small portion. But when I talked to someone from the insurance company, they said something to indicate that the main beneficiary wasn't impacted by divorce. So they were basically, whether it was intentional or unintentional, letting me know, yeah, you would think that because they were divorced, it wouldn't have been his ex-wife, but it wasn't impacted by the divorce. And Lori received 80%. But anyway, so yeah, not only was Tylee not the sole beneficiary, and Charles would have known that, because I know from one of my confidential sources was the person Charles reached out to help get the payment from the life insurance. So this person knew that would have known the details, and obviously Charles would have known that it wasn't in Tylee's name. And then Adam said in his interview that Tylee got $2,000, so it was an $80,000 policy, and she only got $2,000, and then had to pay the car payments for the Jeep that Charles got. And so anyway, there were just a lot of really messed up details in there. But yeah, so I do suspect that that's why Lori was listed as the beneficiary. And I do also wonder if Lori thought that it was still going to be like that sizable policy, because the state of Texas required that Joe maintain a policy with Lori as the sole beneficiary for $350,000. And that's why I think that's part of the reason for the attack on Joe, but also for the lavish vacation, which occurred a week before. Oh, bling is the new black. She said, they say question, but it said, I think they had another fundraiser for Colby after he got arrested for a legal fund. I haven't heard that. So that one I would have been all for. When that whole thing happened, and that it was just such a sad scenario, because even just with everything I've shared, you can see, and I'm not trying to be deterministic and not trying to be unfair, and I'm certainly not making excuses for what Colby confessed to doing, but you can see how he got there, so, but one of the things that was really upsetting to me, again, it's not a flex. I was honestly just distraught over that whole scenario, and mostly for their kids, on just so many levels. And behind the scenes, there were some really sketch things. happening. Like there was a sock puppet that was dropping links to Kelsey's Venmo and PayPal all over the place. And, then this sock puppet's first public post was the week before this incident. And, but when Colby went before the judge in, just dressed in like street clothes, like he was going to, like a pickup basketball game, he it was like a muscle shirt, I think shorts and high tops maybe. Um, that was just so upsetting to me just because I'm like, okay, this family, they circle the wagons for everything. If anyone is like in any kind of trouble from someone from the outside, you see this solid pattern of circling the wagons. And I'm like, no one could even like just drop off some dress clothes so that he didn't go before a judge looking like a thug, and anyway, so but that's kind of my toxic trait. Like sometimes I feel empathy toward in situations where I'm it's not really a toxic trait, but I definitely felt very strong empathy for Kelsey. I mean, like even if we suspend reality for a moment and say like he had been set up, it doesn't matter. Like no means no means no means no means no. Like she could have shown up and they could have been watching Netflix and she could have been in you know anything. And if she says no, that's no. So there's I mean that's just full stop. There's no excuse there. But it was upsetting to see like no one in that whole miserable family could even just like show up with clothes. Like we just want you to have some dress clothes for when you go before the judge. I was also very, very concerned about the impact of him potentially having to register as an SO, specifically the impact on, their kids. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be fair, but it was, that was just a really, just a difficult, very difficult situation on so many levels. And there's no guarantee that that's over for him because it was without prejudice, so it could be picked up later. I don't think it will be, but uh, oh, Danielle asked someone else, why would you say Colby was groomed? And so I'm just going to address that. That is one of the statements that really gets under my skin. Uh, because early on in the case, this was before I even really realized what sock puppets were, and that there were people who like just managed like these small armies of sock puppets. And now I definitely suspect that these were mostly sock puppets, and I even suspect who was behind these particular sock puppets. But at the time, I just thought it was so bizarre that in the Facebook groups that I was in, and there was well, no, early on I was only in one Facebook group, but that all of these people like kept saying, oh, Tylee was being groomed. Tylee was being groomed. And I just thought that was so bizarre. Now I think, oh, it's not as bizarre as I thought because I think that these were sock puppets. But in that particular case, I think and I'm not, again, I want to be fair. This is just my opinion, but having watched some of the patterns from these sock puppets, there was a pattern of some people not wanting Tylee to be seen as a victim. And some of the people, even when they were interviewed, they were very dismissive of Tylee, could not think of a single positive thing to say. And now are, flowing with platitudes and positive things to say. But at the time, it was just radio silence. Couldn't think of anything, but one of the battle cries was Tylee was being groomed. And I was just like, okay, let's suspend reality for a moment and say you're right. If Tylee was afraid when Charles was murdered that she could be next, or also if Tylee knew that Joe was murdered, and even if she had anything to do with it, because there are indicators that Joe thought he was meeting up with Tylee. I will go to my grave saying that there are pictures from the welfare check. If you haven't seen that video, it's on my Analytics YouTube channel. I did a very deep dive into the pictures from the welfare check that a reporter had passed on to me. In fact, Garnet Miega. But so I went through those pictures, except for the like really graphic ones. Those I went through with Janice. But there were multiple indicators that he thought that he was meeting up with a young girl. There was a duffel bag with different color hearts. There was a girl, what looked like a girl's iPad cover. There was an iPad, charging by the door. There were blocks that looked like they said dad. Like there were 3 different blocks. And I think they spelled out dad. And all of these things were by a suitcase, along with like a dress shirt that he had sitting out. So it looked like he was packing for a trip. And so who knows? But let's say worst case scenario, Lori even used Tylee as a lure. And I'm not saying that, but I do, there are some suspicious elements, because when I asked, I've talked about this before, when I asked Tylee when she had last seen her dad, she looked kind of deer in the headlights, and she looked past me, and Lori was standing behind me, and she, like, you can tell, like, someone isn't looking at you. She was looking at Lori and looked a little panicked. And she said that it was about a year. So, when I saw these pictures, I was like, well, she hadn't seen him in about a year. And then Lori said it had been 2 years since they had even heard from Joe. And so that's a huge differential. And I think that's probably why Tylee was a little deer in the headlights, because Lori had already told police they hadn't heard from Joe in 2 years. But anyway, but even if all of those, I mean, we're just thinking worst case scenario. If Tylee was afraid that she could be next, she was right, and she was a minor, and so like some of these people were saying she wasn't a child, she had breasts. I'm like, breasts don't make you an adult, options do. Like, it doesn't matter physically what she looked like, because I was in that situation when I was in foster care. Like, I couldn't just leave. I couldn't just like get an apartment on my own. I didn't have options. And so anyway, so I really hate statements like, and no disrespect to anyone who may have said that, but I don't like statements like the person was being groomed. I think in Colby's case, yes, I do think that there was a codependency there, but you see in many aspects, like Colby was able to pull away from his mom, and in some of the ones that had to be very difficult, like he pulled away from her religion, her church, and he went with Kelsey, and that had to be really difficult for Lori. Even Melanie Gibb talked about having a conversation with Lori about that, and her having to kind of surrender Colby to the Lord with in regard to that. So you see that Colby can like take a stand on things that he believes in, and I do have faith for or at least hope for Colby, that I think that I've seen enough really positive things about Colby, genuinely positive things. I don't just say things like that just to kind of like, oh, let me try to stick a bow on this a really invasive deep dive into his life and his involvement in this case. I genuinely mean that. I think, but I think he needs intensive therapy, really intensive therapy, and in a safe setting where he doesn't have to worry that the person's going to sell their story to some tabloid or write a book or whatever. But anyway, so yeah, so yes, in a sense, he was being groomed, but it was like over a lifetime. I mean, I think in the end, Lori exploited him like she exploited everyone. I've talked about this before. Lori could have shared the Venmos from her own account. We know now from the trial that Lori had moved Tylee's SSI payments to her account. So and she had Venmo, so she could have just paid Colby through her account. She also most probably knew that Tylee had told Colby that she wasn't in control of her money, because then it's quite apparent Colby went to Lori that same day, because we see in the FOIA docs that there was a transfer from Tylee's account to Colby that same day. That was September 8th. Um, so, Lori made sure that Colby's hands got dirty, and they got really dirty. And then Colby, I think, in 2020, he just thought he owned the narrative. He thought he could like go into these interviews and, he is very charming in a lot of ways and stuff. And he has kind of a unique presentation when he's being dishonest, because my assessment is that when Summer is dishonest, she becomes smug. When she makes a statement that is like, that is definitely a lie, we all know that now, she becomes very smug. Colby becomes very charming. And I don't mean this as a criticism of the media, but the media wasn't holding his feet to the flames, because and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I really don't hold that against them. I get angry sometimes, so the people who know me really well know that there have definitely been points of frustration, but at the same time, I've been a reporter. Like, they don't get paid, these outlets, they don't get paid more if their reporting is truthful, or if it's questioning statements. They get paid by views, because their monetization framework is through ads. So the more views, the more money they make. So so none of these reporters would be able to go rogue safely and be able to hold on to their jobs. It's just not realistic. But anyway, so I just think that early on, Colby really kind of dug quite the hole for himself, just because he just felt so confident. I think in a lot of ways, so did Kay and some of the other players, like not players, some of the other people who are involved in this tragedy, like Melanie Gibb, and Melanie Pulaski. I don't think anyone ever believed her, but anyway. So, okay. I will answer one more question, and then I'm gonna go to bed. Let me see. Marianne Nizio asked, how much did Lori profit from Joe's death? For the life insurance, it was a little more than 60,000. It was an $80,000 policy, and she got 80% of that, so that's like 64,000, if my math is right. So yeah. Okay. All right. On that note, thank you for hanging in there. For those who have, I'm actually surprised so many people have. But anyway, you know, if you have questions I didn't get to, I will answer them in the comments. If the video is taken down, I'm sure it will be reported. If it's taken down, you can go to Facebook, the A Murderous Heart Facebook page. Like I said, my experience has been that they have been more fair. So, and then also I'm recording it, and I have the recordings now of all of the videos I've done on A Murderous Heart, and have them saved to a hard drive, and a removable hard drive, and we'll add this video to that as well. So so I don't know. I know that people have mentioned that there's some kind of network that some YouTubers have gone to, and I knew I would have recognized the name of it, but when I was searching, I couldn't find it. I was finding like Vimeo and you know, sites like that, but that's not really where, you know, people like gather. So if anyone knows that, you know, like I said, I would definitely recognize it, but I may start uploading videos there, just, you know, just to have a contingency plan. Okay, without further ado, have a great night and a great weekend. Bye.